Hey everyone, welcome back to Dreamland Encounters. This channel is all about sharing real-life stories of encounters beyond the ordinary, perfect for helping you relax and drift off to sleep. Drop a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Get comfortable, settle in, and let's dive into tonight's story. Late October brought the first real cold to the Sierra Mountains. I'd been driving all afternoon from Reno, craving one of those weekend escapes that start with a good playlist and the promise of solitude. The kind of break you can't find in the city. At the overlook, I pulled over to stretch my legs. The road had been a long grind, and I needed a moment. My cheap Dashcam, an impulse Amazon buy, sat on the windshield like a little black eye. I checked its red light was steady, while pouring coffee from my thermos. Something felt off before the main event. Small, strange occurrences kept adding up. The radio cut out completely for a full minute, unusual for this stretch. My phone flickered between full bars and zero, almost like a digital hiccup. Dashboard lights dimmed twice, just for a couple of seconds. The kind of things you'd normally chalk up to old mountain road wiring. I sat on the car's bumper, pulling my jacket tighter. The valleys spread out below, with the highway curling into a distant canyon. Stars began emerging through the purple dusk. No lights on the opposite ridge, just pale snow and dark trees. Earlier, a hawk had been circling, but now everything was silent, complete silence. No distant traffic, no dogs barking. It was like the world had taken a deep breath and stopped. I walked back to the car to warm up and check the dashcam footage. The timestamp matched my watch, 8:13 p.m. as I placed the thermos in the cup holder. Watching the screen almost absently, that's when I saw it. Static. Something. Bull was coming. Now I sat in the car, engine idling low and even, when something caught my eye. High above the ridgeline, maybe 5 miles away, a small, sharp point of light hovered. It wasn't twinkling like a star, and it wasn't streaking like a plane. Steady as a nail head, it hung in the air. For a moment, I thought it might be a helicopter's headlamp, except it didn't move, didn't dip, didn't throw a beam. It was just there, as if someone had planted a flashlight in midair and left it on. That familiar feeling of being watched returned, a tightness behind my sternum. I held my phone out the window, trying to get a closer look. The camera's autofocus struggled with the dim point, rendering it just a bright pixel. A hawk shadowed the ridge somewhere unseen, catching my attention from the corner of my eye. Then something unexpected happened. The light moved, not down or across the ridge, but sideways in a short, clean arc. This wasn't the random drift of a satellite. The movement was smooth, intentional. It slid left, stopped, then slid right. The words tumbled out of my mouth to fill the strange silence. It felt like watching a child's toy on a string, not something at altitude. Later, when I reviewed the dashcam footage, I realized my initial perception of the time sequence was incorrect. But in that moment, I could only describe the movement as I saw it. Slow, precise, unlike any aircraft I'd encountered. I brought the thermos inside the car and started recording on my phone. The camera captured the light, but the image was terrible, grainy, with blown-out pixelation where the light saturated the sensor. Zooming in on the dashcam, I noticed the built-in date stamp reading 201347. The strange sequence of events unfolded simultaneously. My phone alarm, which I hadn't set, chimed softly. The car's clock blinked 2021 for a single frame before returning to 21 or 14. My breath caught in my throat the way it does when you suddenly realize you're not alone. Far below, a hawk cried, a wet, little keening sound. The light held its position, neither blinking out nor banking away, just a punctuation mark over the ridge. I drove on, my head full of spinning gears, wanting to descend the mountain before the road iced over and I could find cell service to call someone. I pulled into the lot of the first gas station in town, the neon signs humming in the dark. I told myself I'd only be gone for 5 minutes. When I opened the car door, the cold hit me hard. My breath formed a haze in front of me that seemed too thick, moving like smoke. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself to stop acting like a character in a movie. Later that night, back at my laptop after coffee and a cigarette on the hood, I uploaded the dashcam footage to my phone. I watched the segment repeatedly. The video file looked normal. The motion, the arcs, the perched light, even the sound of my thermos lid clicking in the background. But something was off with the timestamp. It read 2047. At the start, a light appears. Over about 3 seconds, the light slides to the right. But here's where it gets strange. The timestamp doesn't just advance 3 seconds, it jumps 7 minutes. It goes from 2021-16S to another time, with no visual cut. Frame by frame, there's no missing footage. The video continues exactly where it left off. The light still hovers. The ridge remains unchanged. My hood ornament is reflected in the lower corner. Nothing skips. Not the image. Not the soundtrack. Only the timestamp changes. As if the camera decided it lived in a different minute. I watched it multiple times, thinking I'd misread the numbers until my eyes hurt from squinting. Slowing it down to 1 frame per second, I saw the stamp leap exactly 7 minutes forward in the middle of the light's tiny horizontal crawl. Then it kept going. I checked everything. The file metadata showed the creation time matched when I uploaded it. The Dashcam clock was set to local time. Nothing in the properties explained the 7-minute jump. I tried everything, plugging the Dashcam into another machine, swapping memory cards, using different players. Always the same result. Smooth footage, inexplicable timestamp skip. I told my friend Jess, who works nights in a hospital and believes in weird things only as a way to avoid being scared by them. She asked if I'd checked the Dashcam firmware. I thought I had, but I updated it anyway. No effect. I took out the SD card and examined it closely, searching for any explanation. At dawn, Rob and I returned to the overlook, driven by my need to see the ridge in daylight. The landscape looked ordinary: scrub, snow, and a thin highway strip like a sewn seam down a coat. We found a small patch of pine sap on the shoulder where my thermos had rested. No prints except ours. No scorched brush. Nothing burned. The only strange detail was some sap appearing grayish instead of amber. Almost absently, I scraped a sliver into a jar with my pocket knife. Rob asked why I kept circling the area. I couldn't provide a solid explanation. The truth about the timestamp skipping 7 minutes while the camera showed nothing seemed ridiculous even to me. He just laughed and suggested it might be a low battery issue. Driving home that day, I moved slower than usual, scanning the horizon as if I'd missed something crucial. The light never reappeared. My Dashcam continued recording, silently stamping minutes across its corner. In dark moments, I replay the clip frame by frame, searching for an explanation that might be hiding in plain sight. Small anomalies had been haunting me since that night. My car's clock would be a minute off. Phone calls would drop precisely when I might describe the moment I'd seen the light, reconnecting minutes later with no missed call log. Colleagues would ask if I was sleeping okay, and I'd always say yes, because that's what you do. Sometimes I compare clocks, the phone, the car, the oven, noticing they mismatch in subtle ways. Nothing dramatic, nothing you could definitively point to as significant. On dark nights, driving alone with the world feeling like a single black ribbon, I catch myself checking the rearview mirror, not for other cars, but for something else. A dot where it shouldn't be, a slow, perfect arc. I don't have a theory, just an awkward, humming piece of footage and a number that leaped forward 7 minutes. No fingerprints, nothing. Strangely, I remained warm long after sitting with my hands in mittens in the cold, a detail that stuck with me like a persistent whistle. Here's the revised version. The night seemed patient, almost deliberate in its stillness. I keep careful backups of the original file in 3 separate locations. I started noticing something strange when the porch light failed. It was late July, with cut grass and barbecue scents filling the neighborhood. My phone read 9:13 p.m. The door light blinked twice. Then darkness swept in like a sudden cigarette burn, not a gradual fade, but an instant blackout. First, my house went dark, then the house across the street. Soon, the entire row fell into shadow. Street lights clicked off as if someone had flipped a master switch. Highway engine noise dissolved into silence. My phone screen became the only illumination for blocks. Curiosity drew me to the driveway. This wasn't just a local power issue. The entire neighborhood had gone black. Cars coasted to curbs, their headlights tracing short arcs before dying. A lone flashlight beam appeared down the block, small but determined. Kids burst from houses in flapping pajamas. Parents followed, blinking with confused expressions. We all did the same thing after that first stunned moment. We stepped into the street. It felt quintessentially American. Neighbors in slippers, gazing upward and at each other. Mrs. and knighted 5 dows. Delgado held a candle under her awning, channeling some movie scene. Ethan from 2 doors down looked bewildered. Sometimes I wonder about sharing this file. Should I send it to researchers who study strange occurrences? Or to a forum where timestamp enthusiasts trade records like currency? Other times I worry about being labeled the guy who can't let go of an unusual experience. So I drive, I keep my Dashcam running, I track minutes carefully. If something else unusual appears, another unexpected light, a movement that defies normal patterns, I'll photograph it, I'll timestamp it. And I'll watch those numbers like they're a silent confession. For now, there's just this one file, and the knowledge that whatever hung above that ridge was patient enough to let my cheap camera record it, clever enough to manipulate time in a way only a tiny digital number would detect. No, down the block, 3 houses away, a kid stood with his skateboard tucked under one arm and his phone gripped tight. The neighborhood was eerily quiet. No sirens, no radio chatter from dispatchers, just a cluster of voices muffled by sleep and growing curiosity. Strange things started happening before anything big occurred. My digital oven clock reset to 120, as if the circuit had been zapped. My instant coffee maker's tiny display went haywire, showing nonsense until I smacked it, which made the screen go blank. Suddenly, my phone dropped from 3 bars to 0, then flickered back with a single text from my sister. "Are you seeing this?" followed by a string of question marks. Dogs began barking all at once, not their usual playful yips, but those deep, urgent howls that make you instinctively look over your shoulder. A dozen dogs down the street suddenly howled in unison like some strange canine chorus. We gathered in a loose circle, surrounded by lanterns, candles, and phone screens creating small pools of light. The sky above was impossibly expansive. No airplane trails, no orange city glow. The Milky Way stretched out like a thick, detailed slab of milk, more stars visible than I'd seen since childhood. It felt like we'd been given a fresh, raw night. Then, something moved. At first, I thought it was a glitch, a triangular patch of sky that darkened for a split second before brightening again. But then it slid slowly, like someone dragging a ruler across paper. This dark shape maintained crisp, angular edges against the starry background. Where it passed, stars simply vanished, as if someone had peeled back a tiny section of the heavens and inserted a black card. People muttered confused theories. What the hell is that? A weather balloon? Their words trailed off, unable to explain what we were witnessing. Ethan tried filming it on his phone. Initially, the screen captured the triangle, but when he zoomed in, it became a grey smear, as if the camera couldn't process what it was seeing. No sound accompanied the movement. No distant hum, no engine noise, not even a helicopter's whine. The dogs barked briefly, then fell silent. A quarter moon hung beside the triangle like an indifferent observer. The shape moved with methodical grace, tip leading, base trailing, crossing the sky in a way that made everyone's necks ache, thinking about light, cameras, and how they interpret a scene. The neighborhood felt suspended in time. Some tried photographing the strange sight on their phones. Every attempt yielded the same result. When cameras exposed for the stars, the triangle became absolute black with no detail. Exposing for the triangle caused the surrounding stars to burn out into pure white. Old analog cameras from Mrs. Delgado's shelf revealed a negative that looked like someone had violently scratched the emulsion. Nobody had seen anything like this before. The triangle moved slowly, tracking a patch of missing stars across Orion and past the Pleiades. As it passed over the gas station sign, the red neon flickered, momentarily hesitating in its color. Street lamps remained dark, having gone out with the rest of the grid. The only potential sound might have been a soft rustle of movement or shoes shifting on asphalt as people looked upward. When the triangle passed over the distant oak and river, the sky around it bent slightly, not like heat haze, but as if gravity was gently tugging the stars toward its form. I noticed this warping and spoke aloud. 2 others immediately echoed my observation. A minute later, a faint, steady humming arrived from multiple directions, as if belonging to the entire neighborhood. The sound made my wine glass quiver, though it didn't originate from the triangle itself. A man named Paul, whom I'd seen earlier at the mailboxes, turned on his truck radio. The radio responded with a thin static band matching the hum's pitch. He quickly shut it off, looking small and bewildered like everyone else. The triangle continued moving, spanning 2 or 3 constellations. The space it occupied was darker than anything I'd ever seen. Not a deeper black, but a true absence. Squinting revealed a soft-edged outline, as if the night had been precisely cut, with its rims subtly glowing. I wondered about the birds. Where had they gone? The street was quiet, almost empty. Something had shifted fundamentally in how we understood our world. My phone displayed a different time from the wall clocks. The oven still read 12, and someone's wristwatch had jumped ahead 5 minutes before returning. Time felt strange, stretching like a rubber band around the group of people on the street. As the unseen triangle drifted slowly overhead, the air suddenly snapped. Stars realigned, not perfectly, but as if someone was carefully repositioning them. The humming stopped. Dogs barked simultaneously, though I couldn't tell if it was out of relief or protest. A car down the road jerked to life, its headlights cutting bright rectangles through the darkness. Homes flickered back to life as the electrical grid reconnected. Street lamps buzzed with a warm, uranium gold light. Glenn, from across the street, laughed too loudly, muttering something about needing a drink. We stood bathed in warm light, feeling like a page had been turned. People drifted toward their houses with private smiles and unspoken questions. Delgado hugged herself and walked slowly, as if holding on to a secret. Ethan showed us his shaky video, a blurry smear that transformed into a scene of scattered birds where the triangle had been. Walking home under familiar porch lights, I felt compelled to keep checking the sky. The night looked ordinary but somehow sharper, as if our perception had been heightened. At home, small domestic details anchored me. The smell of coffee from next door, the faint sound of dishes being washed. In the kitchen, I put down a jar and turned on the light. Its bulb hummed normally. Before bed, I checked the back window one last time. A motion light clicked as a raccoon passed. Under the street light, the grass looked flat and unremarkable. No trace of the triangle remained. The weather app showed only a note about a temporary local grid event. With barely 1 bar of service, I texted my sister, "You saw it too, right?" She replied with a laughing emoji and, "Yes, don't be weird." Public had slumbered in its usual quiet, windows dark with slow breathing behind curtains. The ceiling fan hummed a steady note that made the house sound familiar. I lay there, trying to capture what I'd seen using ordinary words: a triangle, a silhouette darker than the night. Attempts to assemble facts into sentences felt like inadequate bandages on an unhealed wound. Morning arrived with its mundane proofs of order: a garbage truck, a mail carrier, a neighbor's dog dragging its leash. People shared the story in bright, efficient snippets over coffee on driveways. A neighborhood website post emerged with 3 shaky videos and 20 comments. The power company reported finding nothing wrong with the lines, while the mayor's office issued a cryptic statement about an unexplained visual anomaly, advising against speculation. Laughter followed that statement, quickly souring as hands found their way into pockets. At work, co-workers asked about my weekend and the lights. I acknowledged seeing them, keeping details minimal, the way one does after witnessing something that defies explanation. During lunch, I stepped outside. The sky was clear, normal. A short breeze passed. I took pictures, almost mockingly, as if documenting the cloud's obedience to the day. Since then, my nighttime drives through the neighborhood have slowed. I pause at the corner, scanning the sky where the triangle once slid, or where I remember it sliding. Sometimes I see a plane, an aircraft's contrail, other times, nothing at all. The stars remain, big and patient. The memory of that black triangular cut across them sits within me like an unfinished musical note. I don't have a neat conclusion. I have only the streetlights glow, a dog's sudden chorus, and the way the entire neighborhood gathered in slippers, united in trying to make sense of something. It began with a drone launch during that perfect pre-sunset moment, soft oily gold light that makes cliffs look like travel brochure landscapes. I'd driven up the coast alone, seeking escape from emails and bills. The location: a small cove north of Mendocino, a rocky, scrub-filled stretch accessible only by hiking, offering complete solitude. Now I was flying my Mavic Air 2 drone over a coastline where the ocean stretched flat as a mirror, not an expensive piece of equipment, but good enough to capture better footage than my phone. Standard pre-flight checks were done, props checked, GPS locked, battery at 90%, and controller signal bars strong. My plan was simple: get a sweeping view of the cove, cliffs, and shoreline. I clipped on the prop guard out of habit, even though I never used it over open water. There's comfort in these little rituals. At first, everything seemed normal. The drone lifted and positioned itself just above the cliff edge, and I guided it forward along the coast. The camera feed was crystal clear. Dark kelp drifted like slow shadows, and wet rocks glistened beneath. I lowered the drone to capture surf lines and a small patch of sand that looked like a pale thumbprint. The colors were extraordinary. Blues I'd never seen on my monitors. Then something small happened. A compass warning popped up, something I'd seen before in parking lots when car radios interfered. Usually, moving a few feet would clear it. I nudged the drone sideways and the warning vanished. I kept flying. A minute later, something strange occurred. The birds went completely silent. This stretch was usually alive with gulls looping and terns darting over the water. They'd been noisy since I left the parking area, acting like they owned the place. But now, suddenly, nothing. Wings folded, a few birds coasting in wider arcs, but the noise just stopped. It was like background music. Cutting out in a movie, you only realize how loud it was when it's gone. Simultaneously, the controller beeped, signal lost. The screen froze momentarily. The altitude read 280 feet, and then the telemetry continued, though the image blurred into static for a split second. The controller tried to relink, the icon pulsing before the feed returned as if nothing had happened. Drones lose signal all the time and recover, but something felt different in that tiny slice of time. Whether it was air pressure or my imagination, I'll never know. I should have brought the drone back immediately. Instead, I pushed it a bit further. I eased higher to give myself more margin, watching the beach for anyone, thinking about how nice the footage would look on a slow second-day edit. The camera was sharp. The kelp looked like a dark braid. I wanted to get the whole bay in frame. Suddenly, the screen went black again, and this time the controller gave me the return to home countdown automatically. RTH engaged, I said, and then the telemetry froze at 362.1. The controller still showed bars, and the GPS map rendered the drone's white dot where I'd sent it, but the live image was gone. I panned the camera with the wheel and got nothing. Just a grey fuzz where the ocean should be. I thumbed the control, waved my arms like I was signaling an idiot on an airstrip. Nothing. The controller kept beeping insistently, but the bird didn't obey. Running down the path toward the shoreline, controller in hand, I knew the automated return hadn't kicked in the way it should. The drone was out beyond the kelp line, farther than I usually pushed. As I crested the last dune, the wind hit, a small gust off the sea that made my eyes water. I could see the surface. For a few seconds, my brain tried to explain everything. Maybe it had been a flare, a wake from a fishing boat. Then I remembered the feed had gone dark and tried to locate it with my eyes instead of the screen. Search patterns are dumb when your hands are shaking. Moving along the waterline, I scanned the horizon inch by inch. The sun lowered itself like a coin slipping into velvet. I called out the drone's name like it might answer. Nothing. After 20 minutes, I hiked back up, chest aching, thinking I'd just lost a stupid little machine to the ocean. The controller recorded last telemetry at 3016 on 21, and then nothing. As if the unit had stopped logging, I sat on a ragged rock and told myself I wasn't the first person to lose a drone. People in forums lost them all the time, to gulls, to salt spray, to software. I texted Sophie, my sister, who's a marine tech, a brief bitter joke about buying a new one. Sophie replied with a short emoji and suggested I check tide charts before I started fishing around. I laughed at myself and did, realizing the tide was definitely heading out. If the drone had fallen into shallow kelp beds, it might have been on a rock now. That made me feel better enough to go looking at low tide. I walked the black sand and the slick rocks until my ankles got wet. The drone bobbed up, caught in the kelp, its white shell angled. One prop had snapped, one arm gouged, but it was here. The little orange case, streaked with seaweed, dragged onto flat rock. I sat down hard. The drone's chassis felt oddly warm, like it had been near a heater. My numb fingers popped out the SD card, and I waited for it to dry before sliding it into my phone adapter. When the video file opened, the first frame made me laugh. Just grainy ocean, and the drone's shadow over grey water. I scrolled forward to where I remembered the feed, dying at 03614. Initially, the footage looked normal. The drone drifted on its station, showing kelp and foam. But between 320 and 22, something strange happened. The image beneath the drone cut to a texture I couldn't name, dark and moving, not like a boat wake or fish school. For one frame, the screen filled with an almost matte black, as if someone had dropped a wide cloth over the lens from beneath. The next second, the camera recorded something massive passing underneath, blocking the entire ground. This wasn't a shadow from above, but an object with definite mass and edges moving across the frame. The way the footage looked was uncannily real. Light wrapped around it perfectly. Small bubbles and foam clung to its edges for a fraction of a second. The refraction at the margin suggested something wet, large and impossibly real had moved between the lens and the world. I scrubbed through the clip dozens of times until my thumb cramped. The object filled the frame for about a second. Then the image stabilized on open water, and the drone jostled as if a bird had passed too close. No roar, no sound, just a faint wind hiss picked up by the microphone. Later, I noticed a single frame glitch in the embedded log. The camera stamped 0321, then 321 in the very next frame. External metadata showed continuous recording with no edit, but the last frame before the black fill had been followed by exactly 7 minutes in the timestamp. I called Sophie and left a short message. Meeting at a diner felt less insane than talking in my car. When I showed her the footage, she watched with that serious look she gets when trying to fit a weird sensor trace into something explainable. Then, she said it could be a whale, the kind of explanation you grasp when searching for something rational. Humpbacks can cast strange shadows, especially with low sunlight or a fishing net in view. But something didn't match the physics of how this appeared. It looked pressed right against the lens. I'd considered explanations. Whales, trawlers, cargo ships with cranes, massive seaweed mats. None explained how the frame filled or the digital timestamp's 7-minute hiccup. Sophie suggested sending the raw file to friends with technical expertise. I did. Some mentioned compression artifacts. Another thought it was a lens smear until slowing down revealed distinct edges. Nobody offered much beyond mild curiosity. People online and on local Facebook pages asked questions. A few joked about alien manta rays. One fisherman described a moment off Bodega when the sea suddenly felt wrong after a storm. The harbor master remained silent. The county marine lab requested borrowing the drone. I let them have it for a week. They ran tests through their equipment and returned the case, cryptically mentioning salt crystals without clarity. Their lead technician handled the device with unusual care, sliding a business card into an anti-static sleeve like fragile glass. I still keep the clip on my hard drive. Sometimes at night, when the house is quiet and the tide's high, I watch it. The object's edges look like a shadow skin with unusual folds or ridges. Each time I slow it down, I'm left with the same unsettling sense. It's too structured to be natural, yet too simple to be intentionally crafted. The 7-minute timestamp glitch remains reproducible, yet unexplained. I kept the battered drone partly due to its cost, partly because discarding it felt like dismissing an unexplained moment. Something massive and silent passed beneath my little machine that night, something that didn't disturb the water as I'd expect. Then the footage returned to showing ordinary surf. I went home, made coffee. Occasionally I upload the file, watching where the darkness enters, then stop. Sometimes I drive the coast at dusk, hands on the wheel, remembering. I drove out to my grandmother's farm, 4 miles down a gravel road outside York, Nebraska, because the forecast promised a good meteor shower. Picard's peak around midnight, the kind of spectacle you go see if you grew up without streetlights. A patch of sky seemed big enough to swallow whatever falls through it. My friend Leia came with me. She's the type who packs extra sweaters, a battery lantern, and a bag of weird jerky she swears by. I brought my old lawn chair, a thermos of coffee, and my dad's binoculars. He'd always said binoculars catch more streaks than a telescope. We set up behind the old corn crib where the ground dips and the horizon cuts clean. The air was hot and dry, the smell of cut alfalfa thick. Crickets filled the field in that steady, comfortable way they do at dusk. A tractor hummed somewhere in the distance, and occasional dog barks drifted down the lane. We were half distracted, complaining about work, about nothing, When the first oddness happened, the farmhouse lights across the road went out. Not a slow dim of a failed bulb, but a clean shut. Harrow's porch light blinked. Then the whole house turned black like someone had closed a lid. A second later, the distant highway lights went too, and the world lost that orange haze you always forget is there. "It's the grid," Laia said, frowning. "Or a storm maybe, but the sky was clear. My phone had 2 bars and then none." Laia's showed the same. We laughed, standing in the dark with our phones like weird little beacons, telling each other, of course, everything would fail the minute I brought a thermos of coffee. The first meteors came like any decent show. Quick white lines tearing through the black. We counted 3 nice ones in the first 10 minutes and got that stupid little thrill you get when something you expect actually happens. Then the animals stopped. Not gradually. The crickets, the frogs, every night noise cut out like a switch. The silence hit so sudden I could hear my own breathing. Somewhere a rooster slipped into nothing. We both looked at one another, stupid smiles freezing. "Okay," Laia said, not a joke this time. "That's weird." We sat without talking for a beat, half afraid to break the quiet. 9. A light appeared in the sky where no meteor should have been. No streaking, just a distant lamp-like static hanging silently above. It was faint, a soft white dot hovering higher than the corn crib and past the trees. At first I thought it might be a plane's navigation light, but it didn't blink. Planes usually make noise on nights like this, and this thing was completely silent. We watched as more points of light emerged. A ring of tiny pricks hovered above the tree line. They weren't bright. If you weren't looking directly at them, you might mistake them for stars. But their behavior was strange. When one light came on, another nearby would dim. They tilted slightly, as if testing positions, moving slowly like a carefully wound clock. I tried filming with my phone, but the footage looked useless. Just little dots against a black sky. Zooming in made the camera's image fuzzy, and the dots turned into smears. Yayla's binoculars worked better. Through them, the first 3 lights had a faint blue tint like a small LED. I tried rationalizing. Maybe someone was flying drones. Perhaps someone was shining a laser from the silo. Maybe we were just tired and the sky was playing tricks. But then the lights stopped streaking. They simply hovered. Every meteor we'd expected to see as quick streaks was now stationary. A cluster formed. Like beacons in a constellation someone was rearranging mid-air. My cheap digital watch did something weird. It blinked forward a minute, then back. The thermos lid squeaked when I unscrewed it, as if under pressure. Yela's hair stood up at the nape of her neck with a static charge that seemed to have no wind source. Dogs across the road started a long communal bark, and then abruptly stopped. The farm's kitchen radio, which usually sits on static, suddenly chattered with a single tone and then cut out. Everything felt slightly out of sync, like the night had changed tempo without telling us. The lights began to rearrange. It took time, which made it feel more One would go dark while another 5 degrees clockwise would brighten. A perceptible line of motion emerged. 4, then 6 lights coalesced into straight edges. The space between them showed an exact geometry that couldn't be accidental. They moved with the precision of people carry a frame through fog. No crickets fell silent when the lights appeared. Laia asked if I saw them, her tone hinting she wanted a clever response. My mind raced through calculations, because that's what you do with things beyond naming. The light settled into a precise hexagon, its edges defined by faint dots against empty sky. It hung over the cornfield like an impossible billboard, casual yet strange. Something shifted in the atmosphere, not a breeze, but a pressure, like standing at a cavern's entrance. My eardrums popped softly. A metallic taste filled my throat. Yela's flashlight flickered to a dull red glow, and her phone chimed with meaningless characters before going silent. Then the lights began to fade, not all at once, but rhythmically, like someone quietly turning down lamps in a theater. The hexagon dissolved into pinpricks, each blinking away until pure starry darkness remained. Ordinary sounds returned instantly, crickets resuming their chorus, distant highway engines warming the background. We sat in stunned silence, absorbing the prairie's familiar soundtrack. Laia claimed she saw movement inside the hexagon before it disappeared, a shimmer, something darker than the surrounding space. My camera footage showed only white dots and a glitched frame where everything washed out. Strangely, the timestamp jumped 3 minutes between two frames. We packed slowly, the gravel lane sounding amplified in the darkness. Mrs. in Styes and Talpidai is stir. Hargrove's pickup rolled by, her wave a silent question. At the gate, Leia hesitated. "I don't know what to do with this," she said. I suggested the most sensible approach. Go home, drink coffee, and pretend the world hadn't momentarily rearranged itself. She laughed, a small, tight sound, and agreed. The T-sky might rearrange itself while I wasn't looking, so I kept glancing up. Not at the strip mall lights, which held no semblance of the field's strange atmosphere. People sat on porches, talking in their usual way. My phone finally caught signal at the town's edge, and suddenly a dozen messages arrived asking about the meteor shower. Leia had texted a photo taken before everything shifted. A dark screen with pinpricks and the caption, "I stayed." That night, sleepless, I traced the small wrongs that could build something larger. Electronic glitches, animals freezing, neighborhood lights failing simultaneously, a strange pressure in the air. These were the breadcrumbs. The hexagon felt like the one shape a human mind could grasp, something definitive. But naming it didn't solve anything. The sky had paused and rearranged itself like a hand sorting through cards. The county paper mentioned unusual sightings in a single paragraph, with a farmer suggesting lens flare. The University Astronomy Club posted a video showing a smear, some static, then nothing. Predictably, internet arguments erupted in the comments. Leia and I compared notes at a diner, discovering small discrepancies. Our written times differed by seconds. Our photos had different glitches. Our watches had inexplicably lost and gained minutes. A week later, I returned to the field. The ground where we'd sat was rod down in a neat, radiating pattern, not crushed, but pressed, as if something heavy had rested and then departed. My picture looked ordinary until I zoomed in, revealing a faint metallic dust clinging to a leaf. I wiped it with a glove and sealed it in a Ziploc, feeling like I was preserving evidence. I have no tidy ending. No explanation for the meteor's absence or the light's strange behavior. Just a chain of small, wrong things, the silence, dying phone bars, stuttering watches, and the memory of a hexagon hanging over the corn like a cut in the sky. Some nights, I still look up. No, stars rarely move, and we keep making lists. But occasionally, I find myself pausing, listening intently when the animals grow silent. It's as if I'm waiting for the first wrong note that might signal the sky is about to rearrange itself once more. At 2 o'clock in the morning, I noticed a figure in the kitchen window. I was making tea, unable to sleep. A small, practical ritual. The house was so quiet that the refrigerator sounded unnaturally loud. Outside, the winter sky was a glossy black, with a thin rain that had stopped an hour earlier, leaving behind the smell of cold concrete. My kitchen overlooks the backyard, beyond which lies an alley and the backs of other houses. I know every ordinary shadow at this hour, so when something moved in the glass, my mouth went dry. At first it was just a smudge, a darker blur against the dim reflection of my island light. Then the shape traced a gesture, one slow, deliberate arc, like someone pushing back a sleeve. It wasn't a full silhouette or an identifiable person, just the suggestion of shoulders and a head, a vertical presence that matched no tree branch. The movement was slightly out of sync with my own. I lifted the kettle to my cheek to warm my hands and watched. The figure moved when I didn't. When I considered it as a reflection, something felt wrong. It seemed to have depth behind the glass, rather than existing on the same plane as the kitchen. I opened the blinds on the sliding door, driven by the only natural response, to look. The backyard was puddled under the deck. Oak leaves beaded with water, and a trash can leaned slightly farther into the alley than usual. Nothing moved. No person, no cat, no raccoon. Just slow mist and a porch light pulsing like a heartbeat. When I closed the blinds again, the figure remained, for a moment, exactly where it had been in the glass. I felt like a smear the world could keep, even after the real thing had gone. Then it dissolved softly back into the ordinary reflection of my oven light. I stood there, doing what anyone would do, creating explanations. Maybe headlights catching a curtain, someone on a ladder outside a neighbor's house, or my own shadow doubled. My phone lay face down on the counter. I flipped it to check the time, then texted Liza at 2:27. My friend worked nights, and I wasn't seeking company. It was just easier to say something small and ordinary to someone who understands when your brain feels larger than the room. She always kept things short, replying within a minute. "Go to bed, Nate." I poured the tea and noticed the clock over the stove flicker. Jumping from 209 to 214, I steadied myself and laughed. Cheap digital clocks do that when power dips. The oven display also blipped, going to all zeros for a heartbeat. No lights went out. Everything stayed on, but a thin metallic ringing hummed in my teeth, barely audible like the background noise in old hospital rooms. I told myself not to make anything of these electrical quirks and wondered why I was standing by the window so late. Then Scout, the neighbor's golden retriever, caught my attention. Normally he sleeps under my kitchen window like he owns the yard. But tonight he was inside. I'd heard Liza let him in earlier. When I walked to the sink, he barked once, a long sound that was part alarm, part question. I froze, and the sound didn't repeat. The neighbor's kitchen curtain switched, that tiny movement like a breath. I opened the blinds and looked into the backyard, the porch light casting a yellow smear across wet boards. Nothing was out there. Instinctively, I took a photo with my phone, proof, data, something to show. The image was a grainy square with my island light and a darker area where something might have been, but when I zoomed, the file was overexposed, revealing nothing. The pixels refused to resolve, as if the camera politely declined to record. I set the phone down, knowing that staring at screens late at night makes the mind run wild. Around 2:25, the street suddenly came alive. A car door banged, a bike squeaked by, a neighbor's porch light flickered on with that annoyed stutter old wiring creates. Someone else is awake, I thought, which made me feel marginally safer. Sharing weirdness somehow dilutes its weight. I took a pull of tea and felt ridiculous for being on edge. Then came the knock on the back door. Not a quick delivery tap, but 3 slow, measured knocks, hardly louder than a whisper. The night felt uneasy from the start. A knock echoed through the quiet, and I turned to look over my shoulder, my heart doing an uncertain dance. The back door's 2 locks and chain seemed both a comfort and a barrier, while the porch light cast a thin halo across the deck. I'd already scanned outside and found nothing. Something about the scene felt familiar, making the knock feel like an unwelcome intrusion. Standing with the door slightly ajar, I checked the chain and deadbolt, blinds creasing against my back. No additional sounds followed, just the distant rhythm of rain hitting gutters and a dog's intermittent bark from down the block. Possibilities raced through my mind: a confused neighbor, someone drunk, or maybe the wind throwing a branch against the wood in a way that mimicked knocking. My mouth tasted metallic. I called out, "Hello," and heard only my own echo bouncing back. For 10 minutes, single knocks arrived like a precise metronome. One pause, then another. Eventually I stepped onto the porch, my teacup clutched like a shield against uncertainty. Cold bit through my robe, and my slippers left soft prints on the mat. I surveyed the yard and alley carefully. The trash can remained tipped as before. Wet leaves and car oil scented the air. No footprints, no flashlight beams, no lurking figure against the neighbor's fence. When I stood still, the knocking ceased. It felt deliberate yet simultaneously absent. The rest of the night became a series of small, careful checks. I walked the house perimeter in my socks, gravel crunching loudly in the silence. The security camera over the garage recorded only streetlight blobs at 2:32. Its timestamp mechanical and precise. On playback, a brief shimmer appeared. 3 frames of a darker smear that software smoothed into meaningless noise when accelerated. I constructed rational explanations: faulty wiring, an animal, an overworked neighbor, my own exhausted imagination. The list grew to cover the unsettling fact that something undefined had triggered motion in the window and knocked at the door with an unnervingly polite restraint. We build explanations because we want the world to make sense, craving the comfort of understanding. Around 3 a.m., I finally went to bed, but not before performing those small, protective rituals that provide a sense of control when the night feels unpredictable. I double-checked the locks. I placed the kettle within reach. I left the song, kitchen light burning. Sleep came in fragmented, watchful moments. A week earlier, I dreamed someone stood at the window, mouthing my name with letters that tasted like metal and felt wrong. When I woke, The house settled into its ordinary breathing. Morning arrived with a mundane rhythm that felt almost obscene after that night. Neighborhood life continued its predictable dance. Kids waiting for the school bus, my neighbor retrieving his newspaper, the mail carrier whistling as he reached our porch. I checked the sliding door for prints, finding only expected rain smears. Scout lay on his kitchen mat, wagging when I knocked between our houses. Liza appeared with 2 mugs, her smile turning our nighttime strange texts into a shared joke. She asked about the camera, so we replayed the last clip together. The software revealed nothing conclusive, just a black window square and 3 frames of static where a shape might have been. Those frames refused to resolve into a person, only noise, as if something deliberately avoided being captured. Later, over coffee, Liza offered practical comfort. Sometimes things echo in unexpected ways. Reflections catch movements in neighbors' yards. Passing cars create patterns that suggest something more. That's how you live after an unexplained moment brushes past you. Testing normality until it feels right again. A Monday later, I discovered an old photograph in the attic. It showed the house when the maple was just a sapling. Neighborhood kids playing in the yard. The photo's edges were worn, its glass cracked. When sunlight hit just so, the frame's reflection revealed a dark smudge exactly where I'd seen that earlier figure, a suggestion of a head in the same precise spot. I couldn't explain how a decades-old photograph could behave this way, so I wrapped the frame in paper, sliding it under the bed like a private mystery. I took apart the kitchen clock, found a swollen capacitor, and replaced it. A technician checked the oven circuits, which tested fine. Gradually, the house felt like itself again. Fixtures fixed, devices behaving. Yet something in me remained alert, like someone listening after a sudden loud noise, more attentive to small sounds and subtle shifts. No, here's the rewritten text. The window reflects something strange, a presence that hovers between seen and unseen. Sometimes it's just a smear of light, other times nothing at all. A friend once told me about her aunt's place upstate, a similar story of odd reflections and unexplained sounds. We laughed about it, the way people do when confronting something unsettling. Now I keep the blinds halfway open at night, watching myself as much as watching outside. The house continues its rhythms, clocks ticking, life moving through predictable days. If something returns, I know the drill. Look, confirm, maybe call someone, spill tea on the counter, try to make sense of the inexplicable. When the blinds are wide and the glass turns dark, the world offers a hint of something that demands a choice, name it or leave it unnamed. After that night, I left the kettle on the stove, its blue light pulsing like a heartbeat. Each morning became a deliberate act of reclaiming normalcy, coaxing the ordinary back into existence. A phone buzz at 2:11 a.m. broke the silence. Maya's text simply read, "Go outside, look west." She's the type who communicates in urgent, cryptic commands. I pulled on my robe, shuffled into slippers, and stepped outside. The day's warmth had vanished, replaced by a knife-edged cold. Backyard lights were off. Beyond the oak-lined neighborhood, the western sky was a deep, starless black. For a moment I thought she was playing a joke. Then I saw it. A single, unwavering red point of light hanging motionless above the tree line, too distinct to be an airplane, too precise to ignore. A faint red light caught my eye, thin as an LED, barely thumb-sized at arm's length. My first thought was drone, except there was no drone sound, no whirring, no breeze. The night felt too still for rotors. I squinted and texted, "Where are you?" Her reply came almost instantly, "At the corner. It's been here 10 minutes. It's getting closer." I stayed on the porch, though every sensible part of me screamed to go inside. The light didn't change for a moment, then seemed to resolve. Like when a smudge on glass suddenly becomes a clear word. I blinked. A basic human reflex, a way to stall. When my eyes reopened, the light was subtly closer. Close enough that the space between tree trunks now framed it, making it look nestled in the branches instead of above them. I checked the back door handle with my hand side, half expecting warmth. It was cool. The neighborhood's soundscape felt wrong. The distant highway usually thrummed like a steady creature, now reduced to a thin hiss. Frogs, typically loud this time of year, was silent. A dog barked twice somewhere east, then nothing more. You don't notice these absences until something else demands your attention. The porch light flickered, not just the bulb, but the entire fixture. like someone had flicked a switch once, twice, then steadied. My phone dropped to no bars momentarily, then jumped back. I considered calling the non-emergency line or Maya, but moving away from the light felt like surrendering my vantage point. I wanted to keep watching. I drifted closer, in small, careful steps. Not the skitter of a drone, but with the confidence of something knowing its path. Each movement seemed to slide between tree trunks, finding holes in the canopy. At one point it was low enough to see a faint halo where leaves caught and dropped color. The red didn't spread. It just sat centered like a bead of lacquer. A minute later, Maya appeared on the porch. Jogging clothes, messy bun, wide eyes, breath visible in the cool. No greeting. She held up her phone like a talisman and mouthed, "Closer, right?" I nodded. She gripped the rail like someone holding onto a boat's edge. She'd walked out just to see if I was awake. Two adults at 2 a.m, standing and watching across a line of trees like silent sentinels. We remained still in a shared quiet while something kept approaching. The yard was completely motionless. A moth hit the kitchen window with a soft, wet thud. I tried zooming with my phone, but the image was grainy. The red appeared as a small circle with a faint inner dot suggesting depth, like it had a core and an outer layer. Audio picked up nothing beyond soft leaf rustling. The silence felt unnaturally measured. I started recording, driven by an impulse to gather evidence against my better judgment. Maybe I wanted to prove I wasn't hallucinating. When something unnatural draws near, your brain catalogues the familiar. If it's a drone, I should hear rotors. If it's a lantern, I'd see someone walking. None of those explanations fit. This red light moved with an unsettling precision, neither animal-like nor mechanically clumsy. I watched with a calm that made my skin crawl. At one point it hovered low enough that I could have tossed something and hit its branch. I blinked. When I reopened my eyes, it was closer again. Not dramatically, but subtly. The kind of movement you only notice in that split second, like a chess piece sliding when you're not looking. My arm hair stood on end. Maya saw it too. She exhaled a humorless laugh. I blinked. She said, "When I closed my eyes, it was here." We rationalized our perceptions, attributing the experience to cold and sleep deprivation, whispering. We debated calling 911 or waking her husband. Ultimately, we called him anyway. He answered groggily and agreed to come investigate. While waiting, the neighborhood did what neighborhoods do. Neighbors emerged, one in flannel, another with a flashlight, someone barefoot in a robe. 5 of us now, an impromptu audience on a narrow street. Someone cracked an alien joke, the laughter coming out too sharp and forced. Phone cameras failed to capture the red's true nature. On screen, it appeared as nothing more than a blurry smear, not of crimson against black. The neighborhood watched, transfixed. A subtle shift occurred as curiosity transformed into something more. We were no longer just observers, but participants. Maya's husband pulled up in his robe, flashlight, and baseball cap in hand. Ethan from 2 doors down climbed onto his truck bed, angling for a better view. He turned a quarter on his boot and swore quietly. The light moved, drawing closer to the line of houses. A car crept down the road, the driver slowing to crane his neck before moving on, eyes wide with an unspoken understanding. Then the dog started, a sudden chorus of yelps erupting from yards down the street before falling into silence. The red light dipped behind the dense trees, momentarily vanishing. I blinked mechanically, a reflex I couldn't control. When my eyes cleared, it had moved further down the row, growing brighter and more defined, as if some small reality was slowly taking shape. Past that point, logic and self-preservation became thin and fragile. It was late October, and I was alone at Lachel Lomond. The weekend camping trip embodied the season, cold, damp, with fog rolling in thick waves off the water. I'd chosen a small clearing near the northern shore, just secluded enough to feel private. My plan was straightforward. Set up the tent, build a fire, spend the night reading and listening to the lake. By 8 p.m. the fog had thickened. The tree line was almost invisible, the water a flat dark sheet reflecting nothing. As I sat by the fire, kettle on the stone edge, something caught my attention. 2 small, bright white dots, almost like headlamps, bobbing slightly. Initially, I thought they were fellow campers on the opposite shore, but they didn't move. They remained perfectly still, human-sized, standing upright, where no path or road existed. The more I looked, the more certain I became. Two men in dark suits, standing impossibly still just beyond the water's edge. The fog rolled thick across the water, playing tricks with my perception. At first I thought I saw something reflections, perhaps, but when I looked again they remained. Two figures stood motionless near the shoreline, their shapes shifting and blurring within the dense white curtain. I could barely make out their outlines, tall, rigid, unnaturally still. My instinct was to dismiss them as a trick of the light, so I busied myself with my kettle, pouring water and stoking the fire. Yet I couldn't help glancing back. Hours passed, one, then two, and they didn't move or speak. The fog grew heavier, the fire crackled lower, and occasionally I thought I glimpsed a slight movement. But maybe it was just the mist playing with my eyes. Something kept me from calling out. An unspoken rule hung in the air, a sense that breaking the silence would disrupt something fragile. I wasn't afraid, exactly, just acutely aware of being observed, of my presence mattering in some undefined way. Around 3 a.m. the fog was so dense I could barely see the shoreline. My flashlight beam barely pierced the whiteness, and when it finally reached the opposite shore, the figures were gone, completely vanished. I scanned the tree line, searching for any sign. Nothing. Then leaves crunching, a steady, deliberate sound emerging from the woods where no path existed. Two figures appeared, walking upright, silent. They moved toward a point in the distance and disappeared behind another line of trees. Their silhouettes were stark against the fog-black suits blending into the night. No footprints, smoke-broken branches marked their passage. By dawn, when the mist lifted, the ground where they'd stood was untouched. No crushed grass, no mud, not even a broken twig. I packed up slowly, half expecting them to reappear, half expecting someone to find me, but nothing happened. Driving back to my flat in Glasgow, I kept checking the rearview mirror, watching for a black car, for figures following me through the lingering mist. The first time I noticed them, I was camping at a familiar spot by Blue Water Lake. I'd often go there alone, seeking quiet after a long week. It's a simple routine, an old leaky skiff, a Coleman lantern, and a fishing rod that rarely catches anything. Just me, watching darkness settle over the trees, letting weekly worries fade. That night was warm and humid, the kind of heat that makes everything feel sluggish. The distant highway hummed softly. I hadn't planned on staying late. Mason's kid had a baseball game cancelled, so I needed some peace. I drove along the A82, and something felt different. Later, I tried talking to friends about what happened, but most dismissed it as fog or other campers playing tricks. But I know what I saw. I camp frequently, and I've never seen figures appear and disappear like that. Weeks later, I returned during daylight, retracing my route to the clearing. The shoreline was empty. The trees looked the same. Nothing suggested anyone had been there. I never saw those figures again. I haven't encountered anyone in a black suit since, and I've avoided that nighttime campsite. Yet, sometimes, driving along the A82, after work, when light hits the water just right, I catch a shadow in my peripheral vision. I swear I see them standing at the lake's edge, still watching. I've tried rationalizing the experience. Maybe it was another camper, a prank, or my imagination playing tricks. But their appearance and disappearance defied explanation. No path or boat could have brought them there. I don't understand what they were doing or why they were watching me. One thing I know, whatever they were, they had been waiting, and I had unknowingly stumbled into their observation. I'm sharing this story now, years later, because it's remained tucked in the back of my mind, persistent and unexplained. Some nights, I still imagine them out there, black shapes in the fog, patient and motionless, waiting for someone else to notice. Even now, as I write this, I find myself checking the windows, half expecting to see them on the distant shore, silent and staring. I was alone in the skiff, pushing it out myself since Mason wasn't around to help. A thin mist rose off the water as I headed toward the center of the cove. I couldn't help chuckling about being a stereotypical old man in a boat, rod in hand, but this was exactly what I wanted. Nothing to occupy my mind except watching the bobber. I set the lantern on the stern and clipped the fishing light to the pole. It wasn't bright, just enough to see the line and a small circle of water. The sky overhead was clear, with a few scattered clouds to the west and a thicket of stars. Everything felt ordinary. For nearly an hour, the scene was peaceful. Frogs called from the cattails. A heron stalked along the far bank. A raccoon briefly skittered along the shore like a late-night prowler before vanishing. The skiff creaked and I hummed off key to the weak but steady country radio station. Around 10:30 something, strange happened. The frogs stopped, not gradually, but instantly, as if someone had flipped a switch. The silence was so profound I could hear the anchor chain clinking against metal. The sky looked the same, with the moon sunk lower and stars still sharp. I tried to rationalize the sudden quiet. Maybe the frogs were sleeping or a predator had scared them. But there was no movement along the reeds. Something felt off. I trailed my hand in the water, trying not to overthink things. The surface was glassy where my hand passed through, with the faint warmth rising like heat, lingering after a hot day. The radio stuttered and cleared, the song resuming exactly where it left off. A typical glitch with a weak signal. I laughed, finding it easier than acknowledging the unease creeping up my spine. Then I noticed another oddity. The insects. Normally, the air would be thick with moths and gnats, especially near the lantern. But that night, almost none were visible. An occasional moth would lazily loop by, but the usual cloud of tiny winged creatures was absent, as if someone had swept the air clean. I baited the hook with a night crawler and cast the line out. Nothing. The bobber sat motionless, while distant cricket sounds softly rustled. I watched the currents weave through reeds as a breeze gently moved them. Without warning, a white light column descended from the sky, striking the lake surface about 30 yards away. It was the strangest sight I'd ever witnessed. Technical optical descriptions aren't my strong suit. Initially, I thought that's the immediate mental response. But this wasn't a spotlight from a plane or a pole-mounted light. There was no visible source. The white column appeared to fall directly from the sky, piercing the water like a blade. Where it touched, the lake illuminated from within, resembling a shallow, unblinking star. Tiny creatures, maybe fish, darted away from the column. A ripple of motion made me momentarily certain I heard a soft slap beneath the surface, yet that could have been my breathing, creating an illusion. Complete silence surrounded me. No motor sounds, no mechanical noises. The radio remained unchanged. The heron on the distant bank didn't move, and the night seemed encased in a bubble where only this light existed. The column lasted 2 or 3 seconds. I counted, as one does when seeking to anchor a surreal moment to something rational. Then the white light folded into itself and vanished. The water returned to its previous dullness. The frog stayed silent. My initial reaction was practical skepticism. Perhaps someone on the far shore held a flashlight at an angle, creating this sky-beam illusion. But I had a full arc of trees between myself and any shoreline. The angle didn't align with any human-made explanation I could conceive. I scanned the horizon. No flashes. No aircraft. No helicopters. Just the familiar distant highway lights. After the beam disappeared, a thin mist seemed to thicken momentarily, clinging to the water's surface. It smelled like the lake itself, wet algae and old bark, lacking the metallic scent some associate with unusual light phenomena. I remained perfectly still, feeling that movement might disrupt whatever tenuous reality thread had created that column. The radio continued its commercial drone. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. A deep, honest sound that restored a sense of normalcy to the silence. I reeled in my fishing line and checked the hook. Clean. No bite marks. Nothing. Here's the rewritten version. My camera had captured nothing, just muscle memory at work. A ring of lantern light against glassy water. The images didn't show the column I'd seen, and that stung my pride in a small, childish way. The entire event felt oddly private, as if arranged just for me, with cameras politely uninvited. I considered calling Mason, but couldn't imagine what I'd say. A light had pierced the water, so I did what men alone in boats often do. Drank cheap thermos coffee and tried to calm myself. I approached slowly, each boat stroke deliberate to avoid creating waves. As I got closer, the water's surface looked colder, a thin skin of chill glossing over it. The cove's grass edges remained still. No waves, no disturbance, no floating debris. Something strange happened. Those peculiar details that burn into memory. The fish weren't doing what fish usually do. No bass breaking the surface, no flies being slurped. For those minutes, the lake held its breath. No fish, no bugs, no frogs. The world had narrowed to a single moment and expanded again, leaving an empty pocket behind. I motored back carefully, testing the old outboard to ensure it wouldn't fail before reaching the dock. It sounded normal enough, a tired cough, a steady beat. When I tied up and carried my gear up the slope, town lights beyond the trees looked unchanged. Steady, indifferent. The neighbor's dog was quiet. The highway hummed its distant background noise. I told no one that night. Driving home with windows down, the air felt fresher than when I'd left. Even the dashboard fan wasn't rattling like it usually does. I went to bed at midnight, replaying the beam in my mind, until sleep claimed what remained of my attention. Morning brought the lake back to life. Cars in the parking lot, kids at the ramp, the froth of ordinary existence. I thought about mentioning it to the man at the bait shop, the type who hears everything and sorts it into neat categories. And I wanted that sorting. Some nights, I still go out. The frogs have grown thin where they once rang loud, and a week later, I noticed an odd ring of bubbles where the beam had struck, vanishing by morning. Mason asked if I caught anything. I told him the honest truth, no, that I'd seen something beautiful and strange. I couldn't decide whether to explain it away or keep it as a plain, private, not-quite story. These days I sleep fine. The boat sits at the ramp, the lantern waits in the garage corner, and the thermos is within reach. I don't expect more lights to come down. But if they do, I'll throw out a line and watch. At some point I decided I prefer the uneasy truth of a thing seen to the tidy nothing of a thing omitted. Right now the lake is just a lake again, and I'm content with how impossibly small and solid that feels. It was 2:06 a.m. when Roxy's growl woke me. Not just any growl, but that low, sustained sound she makes when a raccoon raids the trash or fireworks startle the night. Her heavy body barely moved, but her attention was fixed on the window. I pulled back the curtains and looked out. Figures stood in the field behind my house. Faint shapes at first, thin vertical smudges with two pale dots where faces should be, like reflective jacket strips catching distant headlights. Initially, I thought they were cows from the herd that sometimes grazes on the state lot, but something was off. The dots were too high, level with shoulders, and too numerous to be a tight cluster of cattle. The October night was warm, heavy with cut hay's lingering scent. The usual highway hum had softened to a quiet charge. Part of me liked holding this moment private, a small unshared oddness that made the water feel less like a commodity and more like a place with distinct edges. I sat up, sheets clinging to my legs, watching. A low whine from her turned into a growl as she wanted me to do something. I slipped into jeans and a hoodie, snagged my keys, and stepped out onto the porch. The wooden boards creaked beneath my feet. At the yard's edge, I flipped the barn light switch. It sparked to life, casting a yellow wash across the grass. 70 yards from the fence, figures stood in a loose line along the low rise, marking where the field slopes toward the creek. First, I thought they were teenagers with flashlights. Then, something more practical occurred to me. Reflective survey stakes glimmered in the yard light. When I trained my flashlight on them, the dots flashed back like eyes. They stood human height, perfectly straight. Some seemed to have something on their shoulders that caught and reflected the light in two precise specks. I walked the porch length and called out, "Hey!" The night swallowed my embarrassingly loud voice. No response came. At one point, a figure tilted slightly, and the two specks dimmed as if someone had turned their head. Roxy sat rigidly on my heels. I pulled out my phone to record. The screen focused on empty air. Zooming in on the spot where a figure stood revealed only a grey smear and moonlit meadow grass. Whatever reflected the porch light in a way that suggested a face didn't register on the screen. This was the first small inconsistency of the night. What my eyes accepted didn't translate through glass or digital capture. Walking down the short path to the yard gate, I surveyed the field. It dropped away in a shallow bowl, wet in the ruts, with distant county line starlights trembling far off. The figures remained motionless, standing like posts with pale light points where eyes might be. As I approached the split-rail fence, something strange happened. Two figures at the eastern end blinked out, not like a dying flashlight, but as if someone deliberately turned their torso sideways. One instant, two pale dots were visible. The next, those dots vanished, leaving only a dark vertical sliver where a person should have been. I stopped so. Abruptly, my boots sank into the dew. These vanishings didn't look like hiding. They seemed more like a film frame being removed. leaving the space they occupied feeling inexplicably thinner. A low sound, like an exhale through cloth, barely registered. I wondered if they'd crawled into the ditch or were lying flat in the grass. When I trained the torch into that patch of field, the grass didn't stir. I shouted again, and this time, someone answered with a sound that could have been a call or wind through a hollow pipe. By the time I raised my phone, the sound had vanished. Roxy's nails clicked on the packed dirt behind me. Part of my brain demanded I call the sheriff, while another part wanted to stay and watch until my eyes burned, confirming what I'd seen was real. I slid the phone into my pocket and kept walking along the fence line. The house light fell short, and when I stepped into the softer zone, every hair on my arms rose. The yard seemed to breathe differently, almost imperceptibly. I reached a point where I could distinguish the nearest figure clearly enough to tell if it was human or something else. It had broad shoulders and a straight stance. Reflective dots decorated its chest, not its face, which made me think of tarps and backpacks. Someone must have been out here in high-vis gear for a reason. I called out louder, and then the entire line of figures blinked out simultaneously, not in a wave, but like a string of bulbs someone had switched off. No one ran. No one dropped and rolled. It was a movement like a photogenic turn for a picture, a symmetrical change in orientation. For the first time since seeing them through the window, night sounds returned. A cricket's rasp, a distant truck, tiny normal world things that had been absent earlier. I stood breathing hard, feeling ridiculous. I was close to doing what people do and trying to convince themselves rural life is just like city life. I made my phone ring the sheriff's number, then hung up before connecting, my thumb lacking the nerve to press call. I walked back to the porch, locked the gate, and sat on the steps, watching the field until sweat cooled on my neck. A little while later, maybe 20 minutes on, I noticed something else. A trail of dew on the grass leading toward the trees had a patch flattened in a neat rectangle, about a yard across. It wasn't trampled like something had walked over it. The grass lay parallel and pressed flat as if someone had set down an object and then picked it up. It was damp and smelled faintly of metal and old hay. No tracks around the patch. Nothing out of place. No signs anything had disturbed the ground. I captured a photo because these tiny, unexplainable details might help make sense of the situation. Zooming in, I noticed something strange, a thin pixel line across the image where the patch lay. The camera seemed to pick up infrared more than normal light, with colors looking muted and off. I wiped the lens and took 3 more pictures to confirm what I was seeing. Each time, the patch remained visible. But by morning, when sunlight had fully brightened the field, everything looked normal again. The rectangular area had somehow filled itself back in completely. The unusual smell had disappeared. I knew no one would believe me, which might explain why I hadn't called anyone. The sheriff would likely dismiss it as kids playing around, a hunter's trick, or simply a dream. But I'm someone who notices small, odd details and holds onto them until an explanation emerges. By dawn, Roxy had curled up at my feet, her usual sign that the world felt safe. She slept with one ear twitching, dreams filled with dogs, while soft eastern light filtered through. I made coffee, tried reading the paper, and kept glancing out the kitchen window at the field's edge, where grass met tree line. No marks remained except that neat rectangular area. The fence posts stood exactly where they'd always been. This was just an ordinary empty county lot. Later, when I took out the garbage, a truck rolled down the road and slowed near my mailbox. The driver honked briefly and waved. I waved back, feeling that lingering sense of strangeness. Some experiences stay with you in ways others can't understand. They make you careful about how you describe things, cautious about sounding like you're making excuses. I have no definitive proof, no time-stamped video, no clear explanation. The phone photos are oddly grainy. The grass patch left no tracks and carried a strange smell. Roxy's growl was precisely what you'd expect when something unfamiliar is nearby, but not quite part of the known world. I got through the day, did chores, mowed the lawn, retrieved the kids' baseball from under the fence. The night was quiet, completely quiet. When I camp in Scotland, even during colder months, there's always some background noise. The buzz of midges, beetles clicking in the grass, maybe a bat's faint wing scrape if you're listening closely. But this night was different. I woke up in the middle of the night at Lackland for no clear reason. Normally, I sleep straight through until dawn. But this time I came awake like someone had shaken me. Lying still, I waited to understand what had roused me. It took about 30 seconds to realize something was wrong. A pale green light began bleeding into my tent's canvas. Not moonlight. The moon had set hours earlier. Not a torch beam either. This was a soft green like light filtering through bottle glass. It spread across the tent wall in a shifting pattern, moving as if scanning the trees outside. I first thought a car might have pulled into the levee near the trail. Its headlights hitting the canopy at an odd angle. But the glow wasn't steady like headlights. Instead, it moved in smooth arcs, sliding over branches with an eerie, patient quality. Propping myself on my elbows, heart racing, I stared at the tent ceiling. The glow passed slowly, like something outside was searching with a giant lamp. No footsteps, no voices, just that unsettling light. Earlier, replacing a broken fence post, my neighbor had warned me. All kinds of things out here at night, he'd said. Keep your dog close. That's what people say when they don't want to explain more. I promised myself I'd lock the gate every night and keep a light on. The field remains the same, open, flat, indifferent. And somewhere in that plain, I know there will be room for things that look like people, and then, in a blink, aren't. The morning was quiet as I packed up before dawn, the forecast vague but hinting at potential. From the shore, the sea looked flat and grey, a sheet of dull pewter promising good visibility for small boats. I was out early, knowing that's how you make the most of uncertain weather. Hours later, sitting in my tent, something felt off. An eerie green light had drifted through the treetops, then vanished. The silence was profound and unnatural. No insects buzzed, no leaves rustled. I froze with my hand on the tent's zipper, instinctively holding my breath. When the glow disappeared, I waited. 30 seconds passed before I dared move. Unzipping the flap, I peered out into complete darkness. The tree line was a faint silhouette against the night, water barely moving. The stillness was unsettling. I began to feel scared, not from any visible threat, but from the unnatural quiet. Even if the strange light had been a reflection or someone's torch, it didn't explain the sudden absence of sound. In a deliberate attempt to break the silence, I coughed. The sound of my own throat was shockingly loud. Slowly, sounds returned. First, water lapping against the bank. Then a single insect's faint whine followed by another. Within minutes, the night sounded normal again, as if someone had pressed resume on the world. I remained alert for hours, jumping at every branch creak and distant owl hoot. Through the tense mesh, I watched the treetops, waiting for the pale green glow to return. It never did. Morning brought normality. Birds chirped loudly. Moss and pine scented the damp air. I walked to the water's edge to fill my kettle, staring at the tree line where the mysterious glow had drifted. Nothing seemed unusual, just trees and mist, but the memory lingered. That unnatural silence. The way the glow had moved, seemingly searching. I didn't cut my trip short, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, or worse, examined. 2 days later, as I packed to leave, I glanced back at the clearing. For just a moment, the forest seemed too still, as if holding its breath. Something had been there, watching, waiting. Something I couldn't explain. The morning felt different from the start. I knew these waters like the back of my hand, having fished here my whole life. The coast north of St. Andrews was familiar territory, yet something felt off. I was alone, or so it seemed, as I guided my little Boston whaler past the rocky edge of the bay. Keeping low, I navigated carefully to avoid disturbing the bird clusters near the kelp beds. The tide was out, revealing my usual markers, a big jagged boulder and a rusted post, their undersides now kissing the waterline. It was one of those mornings where subtle details spoke volumes. The wind's pattern on water, a shower of sprats rising, the way gulls settled in unusual numbers. These were the small things that hinted at A's character. Around 7, when the light was a flat grey, I noticed something peculiar about the birds. It wasn't just their reduced numbers, but something fundamentally wrong. Sections of water that should have been alive with motion were eerily still. No white flecks, no movement. The gulls perched motionless on the cliffs instead of flying. A tern passed low, then banked away as if startled by an unseen presence. With the engine idling, I raised my binoculars and scanned the horizon where sea met sky. At first, The object could have been anything, a fishing boat at anchor or a marker buoy, but its shape was too smooth, too bright. A silver form, like the inside of a foil packet, it hung motionless in the sky, defying the sea's natural rhythm. The light didn't reflect off it. Instead, it seemed to glow from within. Instinctively, I moved closer, not out of courage, but from an innate desire to understand. As I approached, other anomalies became apparent. The air felt unnaturally clean, as if a window had been opened in an enclosed space. My radio crackled with static, though no storm was in sight, a thin, pulsing hiss that matched the boat's speed. Turning off the radio silenced the static, but then a faint, underlying sound emerged, more felt than heard, like a distant harbor engine slightly out of sync. When I looked through the binoculars again, I noticed something truly strange. The object had no reflection. The water around it rippled normally. But where a silver shape should have created a surface glimmer, there was simply nothing. I was out on the water, everything still and quiet. The boat's motor had slowed to a soft purr. Ahead of me, something strange hung suspended above the waves. An oval shape about the size of a small trawler, but without any visible hull or mast. My binoculars brought it closer. The object had a continuous surface, dull like tarnished chrome, with faint lines visible on its skin, no bolts, no seams. Nothing normal about it, no weight trailing behind, no birds circling, no heat shimmer, just this silent form, hovering just meters above the water. The sea around me began to behave oddly. The kelp beds that had been lazily waving suddenly started knitting together, stretching as if someone had grabbed the sea's edge and pulled. Rocks I'd known for years disappeared underwater so quickly that my boat shuddered and brushed against areas I always kept clear. My hands went slick. My heart raced. This wasn't a typical tide or channel current. It felt deliberate. While the water surged inward, the silver object remained perfectly still, detached, like a ceiling lamp hanging over a kitchen sink. I thought about turning back. I don't like things without names, and this was definitely nameless. Then I remembered Maggie asleep at home, the kettle on the stove. I'm a curious man. So I drifted closer. The tide rose across the entire bay, neat as if someone had simply tipped a basin. Gulls took flight, their calls sharp and staccato. My radio crackled with a thin hiss, and a low sound hummed beneath the engine's rumble. I knew storms. I understood how water usually moves. But this was something else entirely. The water looked right apart from the lack of wind. I scanned the surface around the silver thing, expecting some distortion or oil slick, but nothing was there. When I lowered the binoculars, the air shifted like a drought in a closed room. The sound under the engine vanished at that same moment, and the roar of my motor suddenly seemed brash and intrusive. Then, in the next breath, the silver shape dimmed, not like switching off, but shading down, as if someone had folded a curtain over it. The field of light around it softened into the normal grey of sea and sky, like when the sun goes behind a thin cloud and everything turns polite. The instant it softened, the tide stilled, as if someone had set a hand on the water's back and told it to stay. The quiet that descended wasn't the calm of a day ending. It was hollow. The low hum never came back. The only noise was the slap of little waves against the hull, and even that sounded wrong, too crisp. I didn't see it vanish. One blink and the object wasn't there anymore. No skid of motion, no upward streak. One blink and my binocular field showed only the regular dull horizon and a band of white where waves broke further out. I found myself laughing once, a short, sharp laugh that came out of me without control. It was the sort of laugh you make when you've let fear uncork and don't know what to do with it. I told myself I'd imagine the whole thing, maybe a reflection from something farther off, a hallucination from a long night and little sleep. Maybe the radio static and the tide were unrelated. Maybe. I didn't stay to prove any of those maybes. I tightened the engine and kept a hand on the wheel until the little bay was behind me. The houses along the seafront were empty and dark when I came in, the net drying racks stacked like ribs. Maggie was on the table with a pot of tea boiling over and a bowl for my boots. She looked up and said my name like she'd expected me to come in messy. She always did, the way wives know the shape of their men. I tried to speak normal, but my words kept catching. At home, I scrubbed salt off my face and the back of my neck, put the kettle on, and tried to make sense of the morning in my head between sips. I told her about the birds, About the sound, about the shape. She listened and asked the sensible questions. Did I see any markings, any heat, any craft? Tony noticed it just after midnight. I was sitting in the living room of my flat in Leith, scrolling on my phone with the TV muted. The curtains were half open, giving me a clear view south toward Arthur's Seat if the sky wasn't too heavy with clouds. That night it was cold and still, a kind of autumn night where the air outside looks sharp. I leaned back on the sofa to stretch and happened to glance out the window. At first I thought I was looking at a plane. There was a single white light hovering above the outline of Arthur's Seat. It wasn't blinking like normal aircraft lights do, just a steady glow. I told the harbour master that afternoon because that's what you do. You tell a man who keeps a book. He nodded and scratched at his beard, asked me to note the time. He said he'd heard nothing on the VHF. He mentioned calls about a strange fog bank 2 miles out the week before, which had been gone by noon. He spoke in the way men do when confronting something not quite right, plausibly, and then nothing. By noon that day, the light had changed. The sea looked like a different thing. Blue and willing, people were out on the promenade with dogs. Someone was walking the line where the water had rushed in, picking up shells and laughing because the morning had been chilly but clear. The bay looked ordinary in that way that worries me most. The world goes on steady with or without an answer. That night I slept badly and woke at odd hours, listening for a hum I never heard again. For a week, I found myself looking at the bay from the window when I should have been focusing on other things. I kept the binoculars on their hook by the door longer than I should have. Sometimes the gulls would hang in a way that made my skin prickle, but the sea stayed steady. I don't have a tidy end to this tale. The silver thing didn't come back. The tide never surged that way again. I still can't explain why the surface where it hung didn't reflect it. Why the water moved like hands had grabbed it. Why the radio hissed at the moment I drew near and stopped the moment it dimmed. I can tell you only what I saw and how the morning pressed at me after. The rest sits here, a blank, easy to look past when the kettle's on, and Maggie's humming in the kitchen, but as neat and stubborn as a bruise when the light hits just right and the sea looks like pewter again. A light caught my attention bigger than I'd expect for something at that height. Unmoving, I kept my eyes fixed on it. Sitting forward with elbows on my knees, I watched intently. For about 10 or 15 seconds, the light hung perfectly still in the sky. Then it blinked. Once, twice, 3 times. These were sharp, clean flashes, brighter than a camera, each separated by a second or two. Immediately after the third blink, it moved sideways across the sky. Not up or down, not fading like a turning plane, but a clean horizontal streak to the left, faster than anything I'd ever seen move across the horizon. It stopped instantly, then shot in another direction and vanished. I pressed against the glass. The skyline above the hill was empty. Nothing remained. Just that thin veil of clouds, lit faintly orange by the city's glow. I stood there trying to convince myself it might have been a drone. Edinburgh has plenty of tourists and people fly drones around Holyrood Park, though not legally that late. But no drone I've seen moves like that. The sudden stop alone didn't make sense. I tried to let it go, but couldn't shake the feeling. I kept the curtains open, glancing back every few minutes. About half an hour later, something else felt strange. Not the light at the street below, usually quiet at that hour. Tonight it was completely dead. No cars, no footsteps, nothing. Living on a corner, I always see traffic lights changing, but now it was like the entire street had paused. I switched off the TV and listened. Normally, there's a distant hum, engines, far-off laughter, maybe bin collection sounds. That night, silence reigned, so quiet I could hear my fridge humming in the kitchen. Then a low vibration passed through the window pane, not strong like a lorry passing, but subtle. The glass buzzed softly under my hand. I pressed my palm against it, feeling it tremble once, then again, as if something distant was pulsing. I turned back toward Arthur's Seat. The sky remained empty, but the city's glow seemed oddly dim. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, thinking I might be overtired. When I looked again, I could just barely make out a faint shape above the hill. I stayed near the window, breath fogging the glass, leaning so close I could barely make out the shape outside. It wasn't like any light I'd seen before. Darker than the sky itself, almost a shadow cut from the clouds. The form was massive, larger than a plane, but without clear edges. It looked smudged, like a thumbprint on glass. When the vibration came again, my floorboards creaked. I switched off the lamp, plunging the room into darkness, and crouched near the window. Some inexplicable instinct told me I didn't want whatever this was to see me. The shape hung there for perhaps a minute. No lights, no sound, just a faint vibration you felt more than heard. Suddenly, it shifted straight upward, vanishing into the low clouds. 1 second it was there, the next it wasn't. The vibrations stopped immediately. I remained frozen, scanning the sky until my eyes ached. Gradually, the city's normal sounds returned. A passing car, a distant siren. Only then did I realize how tense I'd been. My shoulders were aching. I pulled the curtains shut and sat on the floor back against the sofa. For the rest of the night, I avoided looking outside. Even the next morning, I half expected to see something hanging there. But the hill was just a hill, and Edinburgh was its usual noisy self. At work, I said nothing. How could I explain without sounding ridiculous? All I knew was that I'd witnessed a light moving faster than anything I'd ever seen. Something much larger had been sitting silently in the sky, making the entire city feel somehow wrong. My preparations for Ben Nevis had been months in the making. It wasn't an extreme expedition, just a personal challenge. I'd completed smaller Munros in snow, but never the big one. That March weekend, the forecast looked clear but cold, around 60 DC near the summit with light winds. I decided it was my best chance before the season turned. I left early from the Glen Nevis Visitor Centre while it was still dark. The car park had only 3 vehicles. I noticed one guy packing gear into a large red rucksack who didn't seem interested in conversation. The lower path was iced over but manageable with spikes. My plan was simple: up the mountain track, summit by midday, back down before the weather changed. Now I was maybe halfway up when the sky started turning grey, blue. No one else was in sight, with snow crusting the rocks, crisp underfoot. Near a small cairn, I stopped to drink water and adjust my gloves. The air felt heavy and still, but that wasn't unusual at this altitude. Another hour passed, and the upper plateau came into view. Visibility was good, with just a few thin clouds drifting low in the glen below. Silence surrounded me. No bird calls, no wind against my hood, just the crunch of my crampons breaking the stillness. Then something changed. Not exactly a noise, but more like a pressure drop. A sensation before a storm, but sharper. I paused. My watch read 11:47. Sunlight seemed muted, as if someone had slightly dimmed the brightness. I told myself it was just my eyes adjusting to the snow. At the summit, only 2 other people were present. An older bearded man and a younger woman, possibly his daughter. They were taking photos near the rig point. We exchanged silent nods. Walking to the edge, I looked out over the glen. The view was crisp, with every ridge in shadow distinctly sharp. That's when it happened. The light dimmed slightly and temperature dropped so hard my breath fogged thick and fast. I zipped up my jacket. No wind, no sound, nothing moving, but a dark shape slid across the snow. This wasn't a cloud shadow. It was perfectly triangular, like a precise cutout. The shadow moved in total silence. No fluttering snow, no gust of air. Just there one moment, gone the next. Slow enough to track, but faster than a cloud. I felt it was both above and around me simultaneously. The man and woman stopped talking. When I glanced at them, both were staring at the ground. Stretching maybe 30 meters across, the shadow had a sharp edge darker than any normal shadow. My brain desperately tried to rationalize it. A helicopter, a sailplane, but there was no sound, no air movement, no visible object above us. Then it passed beyond the summit's edge and vanished over the north face. Brightness returned like a switch had been flipped. The air remained bitterly cold, but the intense drop eased. I realized my knuckles were white from gripping my trekking pole so tightly. The man muttered something in Gaelic and started packing up quickly. The woman followed without looking at me. Their boots crunched fast on the ice as they headed down the path. I remained alone, heart hammering, scanning the clear sky for any sign of what I'd just witnessed. Known arriving at the car park around 15:06, I noticed mine was one of only 2 vehicles left. The man and woman's car had already departed. I sat in the driver's seat for a long time, gloves still on, staring up through the windshield at the sky. Summit. Everything looked exactly as it should. Just a big mountain, snow on top, sky above. My descent had started differently. The snow squeaked underfoot at a higher pitch, like walking on styrofoam. At a junction, my compass needle trembled faintly, quivering back and forth a few degrees. I initially blamed the metal of the track point, but it continued for another 15 minutes. Halfway down, I caught sight of two figures far below on the track, moving quickly. Though tempted to shout, I remained silent. Something about the atmosphere felt like it would swallow my voice. The rest of the descent became normal. Snow softening under the sun, a light breeze picking up again. I've returned, since in different seasons. Nothing like that moment has happened again. Yet every time I reach the plateau, I find myself glancing down at the snow, waiting to see that impossible triangle slide across it, silent and sharp, as if it was never really here. Previously I had set up camp on the west shore of Loch Marie late in the afternoon, just as the sun dipped behind the mountains. Taking the old road from Macmachine, a narrow path snaking between thick pine forests and peat bogs, I enjoyed the quiet drive. No tourists this far out, just the smell of wet heather and occasional sheep on the shoulder. My landscape photography setup was precise. A camera bag stuffed with lenses and tripods, positioned in a small clearing above the waterline, where grass slopes gently into the loch. The light was golden, spilling across the water, catching pine needles in a soft glow. I took the first few shots, adjusting my tripod, moving the camera back and forth. Nothing unusual yet. A few midges swarmed around my head, but I didn't mind. The wind was calm, almost unnaturally still, creating a mirror-flat water surface perfect for reflections. The sky was blue-grey, with no planes, no birds. I took a photo of the snow where a shadow had crossed, but of course, it was just snow in the picture. And I checked the first pictures on the screen and caught a glimpse of something strange. A quick flash at the far end of the loch caught my eye, but when I blinked, it vanished. Maybe it was just sunlight catching a water ripple or reflecting off a rock, I thought. Then another flash appeared, just a fraction of a second in the same spot. Even though the light didn't make sense, I scanned the horizon. Nothing moved. No birds, no planes, no clouds. Just mountains, the loch, and trees surrounded me. As I set up for a wider shot, the air grew colder. It was the kind of chill that penetrates your hands and nose, even through gloves and a wool hat. The silence struck me, not just around the loch or from the wind, but even the distant hum of traffic had disappeared. Framing the loch with my camera, I captured the sky's pink and orange streaks. I took a series of photos, each a few seconds apart, trying to catch the last of the light. Only later would I notice something peculiar, a small, triangular shape at the far edge of the loch in every single frame. The shape was faint and metallic, moving impossibly fast across the water. I couldn't see it with my own eyes, only through the camera screen. At first I thought it might be a mistake, lens flare, or a motion blur artifact, but when I moved the camera and snapped again, the same thing appeared. The shape shifted position, always triangular, always moving beyond my direct perception. Lowering the camera, I scanned the loch. Nothing. No sound, no ripple, no trace of movement. My pulse quickened. When I raised the camera again and checked the screen, the shape was closer, as if it had been tracking me. I walked closer to the water, boots sinking into wet grass. The air still smelled of damp pine and earth, unchanged. Yet an unsettling feeling grew. I was being watched. Glancing behind, the trees stood still, shadows deep. The loch remained flat and silver in the dying light, seemingly perfect. But something had moved out there. Something that shouldn't be able to hover above water, move so fast, and leave no trace. I took more photos, backing up slowly. Then I felt it. The faintest vibration in the ground, a soft thrum, not from wind or water, but a steady pulse beneath my feet. I paused, breathing shallow, trying to rationalize what I was experiencing. But something was off. A faint vibration persisted even as I stepped back. Then, over the water, a shimmer appeared. Just a flicker, like heat waves on asphalt. A triangular shape materialized, now faintly glowing, moving in a straight line that defied wind and water logic. I tried to track it with my tripod swiveling quickly, but it moved faster than my eyes could follow. By the time I looked up, it had vanished. Nothing remained. The loch was calm, Mountains cast long shadows. Only my racing pulse and a faint thrum broke the silence. Back at my campsite, I pulled out the camera and scrolled through the LCD screen. Every shot from that last half hour captured the shape, sometimes high above the water, sometimes skimming the surface, always triangular, always moving impossibly fast. My hands trembled as I zoomed in. No blur, no distortion. Nothing suggested a trick of the lens. Yet I had seen nothing with my own eyes. I checked the surrounding area, swept my flashlight across the water. Nothing. The loch was dark, still, silent, no waves, no ripples, disturbed by nothing. I walked the shoreline barefoot through cold sand and pebbles. Only my footprints marked the ground. No other signs of movement existed. I kept the camera on my lap by the fire, watching smoke curl into the night. Images glimmered softly on the screen. I tried to rationalize. Lens, artifact, light reflection, maybe a seagull catching the last sunlight. But the triangular shapes weren't random. They didn't match anything in the environment. The loch had been empty, silent. Yet my camera insisted otherwise. By the time I fell asleep in my tent, cold air fogged the canvas interior. I dreamed of the loch glowing, of triangles moving beneath the surface, silent and impossibly fast, rising and falling without regard for physics. Morning came. The loch was calm, sun barely cresting the mountains. I hiked back to the car, leaving no trace except the photos on my SD card. The rest of the loch seemed normal, as if the shapes had been a mirage, but I've returned twice since, camera ready, hoping to catch another flicker. Nothing. Not a single image, not a pulse, not a shimmer. I saw something strange that night, something I can't quite explain. When people hear my story, they smile and nod, dismissing it as imagination or a trick of the camera. But I know what I saw. And sometimes, when everything is still and the light hits just right, I feel a faint whisper of something moving just beyond sight. It happened on a late summer night in central Iowa. I was walking home through the cornfields after missing the bus, cutting through to save time. The air was thick and humid, the kind that comes before a storm. The moon was hidden by clouds, making the field darker than usual. Cornstalks towered around me, maybe 8 feet high, rustling softly in the breeze. Crickets chirped and frogs croaked in the background, but mostly I heard my own footsteps on the dirt path. I wasn't scared. I'd walked these fields many times before, though never this late and never alone. About 20 feet ahead, I noticed a faint red glow between the cornstalks. At first, I thought it was farm equipment or an irrigation marker light. The lights were small and blinked slowly, reminiscent of tractor tail lights. As I got closer, they seemed to lower, hovering just above the ground. They flickered gently, not wildly, but in a steady, rhythmic pattern, almost like fireflies, but with a precise, controlled movement. I stopped and looked around, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The corn remained still, except where I brushed against it. Then, the lights began to rise, not quickly, but smoothly, as if being lifted by an invisible hand. They moved from ground level to about eye height, around 4 or 5 feet up. They didn't drift or scatter like insects might, but rose deliberately, one after another. Something felt off. I was getting uneasy, and I couldn't explain what was happening. The lights were real. The experience was real, even if no one believes me. The cornfield was pitch dark, except for my phone's beam cutting through the stalks. I wasn't sure what I was seeing. I called out softly, "Hello," but there was no answer. Lights blinked in the same slow pattern, all roughly at the same height, facing me from rows on either side. My heart started beating faster, and I pulled out my phone, flipping on the flashlight to get a better look. The moment the light came on, the red lights vanished. Just gone, like they were never here. I stayed still, scanning with the flashlight. Nothing. No sounds except my breathing and the usual bugs. I turned the light off and took a step forward, then another. The silence pressed in, thick and heavy, like the air was holding its breath. About halfway through the path, I heard a soft tapping behind me. Not loud, more like a faint knocking sound on the stalks. It was rhythmic, almost like a code, but slower. I spun around, shining the flashlight back, but nothing was there. No movement, no shadow, just empty corn swaying lightly. I tried to convince myself it was a branch, or maybe an animal, a raccoon, or a bird, but the tapping stopped as suddenly as it started, and I didn't hear anything else. I didn't want to stick around, so I quickened my pace, walking faster through the field. The path wasn't straight, twisting a little with the way the crops were planted, so I had to be careful not to trip. The night felt colder now, even though the air hadn't changed much. Then I noticed something else. My phone's flashlight started flickering, just for a second, then back on. I tapped the screen, tried to reset it, but it was glitchy, dimming and brightening like it was struggling to stay on. I stopped and looked around. That's when I heard it. A low humming noise. Not loud, maybe just a few feet away, but definitely there. It wasn't mechanical like a tractor or electric like a power line, more like a deep, constant vibration that made the hairs on my arms stand up. I pointed my phone toward the sound, but the beam was too weak now to see anything. I tried to stay calm, telling myself it was probably some animal or wind through the stalks, but I was wrong. Suddenly the humming stopped, and the air grew dead quiet again, like someone had flipped a switch. I felt my skin prickling like I just walked through something cold and invisible. I didn't like it. I didn't want to be here. I started moving again, faster now, the corn rustling loudly as I went. The moonlight barely pierced through thick clouds, casting a faint glow as I pushed forward. Suddenly a familiar sight emerged from the darkness, those red lights blinking slowly near the ground, exactly where I'd first seen them. My heart raced. They remained motionless, steadily blinking as if waiting. I backed away carefully, trying to keep my eyes on the lights without getting too close. My throat felt dry, caught between the urge to look away and the fear of breaking eye contact. In a moment I turned and ran, fleeing the field toward the safety of street lights and my house. Home felt normal, but something was off. My phone refused to turn on until plugged in, and even then it seemed sluggish. My skin felt tight and warm, like a sunburn, strange, since I hadn't been outside that day. I told my parents I'd gotten lost in the dark, and they didn't press for details. Weeks have passed, but those lights still haunt me. Sometimes during twilight or in darkness, I wonder if I should have followed them, or if I was lucky to escape. I don't know what they were, or if anyone else saw them. One thing's certain, I no longer walk through cornfields at night. It happened just past midnight in the kitchen. The house was silent except for the refrigerator's steady hum, the kind that makes you question other sounds. Suddenly, static erupted from the radio on the shelf. The strange part? It wasn't even plugged in. I froze, coffee mug halfway to my mouth, staring at the black plastic box that should have been dead. The static swelled and softened, almost like breathing. Initially I blamed stress or caffeine, but the sound was too real, persistent enough to make my teeth ache. Setting down the mug, I tried to rationalize. Immediately the sound stopped, leaving only the refrigerator's hum. Out of habit, I looked out the kitchen window toward the dark field. Just a flat pasture with trees at the far end. Nothing remarkable, nothing with lights, except the occasional shadow. Here's the rewritten version. The night felt strange from the moment I spotted the glow in the distant field. Something was moving across the grass. A pale, almost grey light that seemed to breathe. It wasn't like any light I'd seen before. No drone, no animal lantern could move so smoothly, so deliberately. When I opened the window, cold air rushed against my skin. Static began to echo across the landscape, and I noticed something peculiar. The light and sound moved in perfect synchronization. Peaks of brightness matched rises in the static, then both would fade together. Leaning closer, I gripped the windowsill, desperate to understand what I was seeing. No shape defined the glow, just this drifting, silent presence, accompanied by an eerie electronic buzz. I grabbed my phone, wanting proof that I wasn't losing my mind. But the screen came back black. When I moved to the doorway, the static seemed to follow me, as if the house itself was humming. Even though the radio remained unplugged, my ears felt strained. The sound carried a weight that made me tense. Then suddenly, everything stopped. The glow vanished. The static disappeared. Even the refrigerator seemed quieter. I rubbed my eyes, wondering if I'd imagined it all, but the field looked different. Lighter at the edges, almost damp with something unexplainable. I tried to shake off the feeling, pouring more coffee and muttering reassurances to myself. Sitting at the counter, I waited. The static returned, fainter this time, almost hesitant, then vanished again without its accompanying light. When I checked the clock, 15 minutes had passed in a blur. Looking back at the window, the glow had returned. Same pulsing rhythm, drifting in slow, smooth arcs. My heart raced, but I kept searching for rational explanations. A flashlight? A neighbor's work light? Yet the field remained empty. Quietly, I stepped onto the porch. The air smelled sharp and dry, as if the night had been scrubbed clean of everything else. Creeping to the yard's edge, I watched the light move silently. It never touched the trees, never flickered from wind or leaves. Suddenly, my phone rang out of nowhere. Nowhere dropped the phone, pulse spiking as I stared at the BI. String of nonsense characters. The light vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving only the world's normal hum. Back inside, I locked the doors and dimmed the lights, trying to explain away what I'd seen. Was it electrical interference? A prank? A strange reflection? Nothing explained the timing or the rhythm. It felt like something was pausing, watching, testing my reaction. I grabbed a notebook and started jotting down every detail I could remember. Times, duration, intensity. Each time I looked up, the field seemed completely normal, mundane. Yet I knew something was different. There was an after-image, a residue of motion, like the night remembered something I didn't. Sleep came eventually, fitful and shallow. Around 4 a.m., I woke and checked the window. The field was empty, the world silent, except for the refrigerator's soft hum. I walked through the house, double-checking every door and light switch. Everything appeared normal, unremarkable. By morning, I almost convinced myself it was just a dream. Almost. But the unplugged radio sat on the shelf, still and black, with no power cord attached. For days after, whenever I passed it, the memory of that pulsing light and accompanying static made me pause. I returned to the porch at night, scanning the field. Nothing appeared. No glow, no static, just wind in the grass and the distant low hum of far-off traffic. I considered telling someone, anyone, but how could I explain? A pulsing light, static from an unplugged radio, a field that felt alive. The words sounded crazy even in my own head. So I kept silent. Sometimes late, I'll catch a shimmer at the edge of my vision, a blink too quick for a star. I'll check the radio out of habit. The static is gone now, but the silence feels different. Waiting, patient, and on certain nights when the wind is right, I swear I can hear something soft and low, just at the edge of hearing, like a signal I can't quite tune. My legs were gone after finishing the last med chart. Another slow night at St. Mary's, with a sky that had been leaking drizzle for hours. My name's Elena, and I've been working nights here for 6 years. The night shift was eerily quiet. The telemetry monitors, usually buzzing with patient activity, sat blank, as if everyone had been discharged simultaneously. In room 12, the oxygen wall gauges cycled differently, and the clock on the med cart seemed to pause before catching up. I made a joke to Luis at the desk about a ghost shift, and he responded with a tired half smile. Weird night. My path out took me past the chapel. Its light was unusually on, casting a warm yellow rectangle across the wet pavement. A pair of shoes sat neatly by the step, as if someone had walked out barefoot and vanished. The security window was dark and empty. Automatic doors side closed behind me. By the ambulance bay, the crew was finishing a cigarette. Long night? They shrugged. One squinted at the sky and muttered, "Storm's weird," before walking away. I always park at the far end of the staff lot. It's quieter. My old Subaru, covered in salt with a dent in the rear bumper I keep promising to fix, sat waiting. As I crossed between cars, building lights stretched long bars across the asphalt. A stray patient information leaflet fluttered under a windshield wiper. Then it happened. Every car alarm erupted simultaneously. The strangest cacophony. Metallic, thin sounds like tiny, coordinated sirens. Not angry, but rhythmic, bouncing between vehicles like a ripple. The noise was so sudden my lungs emptied. People in scrubs looked up from benches. Orderlies emerged from triage. A security camera on the ER roof wobbled as if turning its head. I froze under the fluorescent lights. Not, he stood in the hospital's east wing, staring through the glass. A silver oval drifted in the window's reflection, hovering low enough to block the sodium halo from the parking lot lights. Its shape wasn't sharp-edged, more like a satin-wrapped metal slab moving slowly across the sky. His brain offered safe explanations, maybe a balloon, a blimp, or a police drone. But this object bore no lights. No steady red, no blinking greens, no strobes or beams. No sound emerged, not even a distant hum. The lot alarms continued their single, unbroken pitch, making the world feel slightly off-kilter. Half of him wanted to pull out his phone. The other half remained rooted to the spot. Only then did he notice his coat was soaked through at the shoulders, the drizzle now more of a mist. His hands felt damp, his chest tight with an unexplained tension. When he finally mustered the courage to look directly at the sky, nothing remained. Empty clouds hung where the oval had been, illuminated by sodium and moonlight. The car alarms cut off instantly, matching the object's vanishing moment. No reaction followed. People simply stared at papers or watched silver spray beating against the asphalt. A security guard emerged, flashlight sweeping and collar raised against the mist. His radio clicked and hissed silently. After hearing the account, he squinted at the sky and patrol car, responding cryptically, "You and me both." He explained the alarms had triggered in a precise sequence, with watch cameras capturing only a white smear and a time-stamp jumbled in static. This wasn't a man prone to storytelling. He was methodical, someone who counted cigarettes and maintained a tidy desk, yet a certain tightness in his voice mirrored the witness's own unspoken uncertainty. Something had happened even if its nature remained undefined. The engine coughed to life as I started it, my hands trembling so much they slid across the steering wheel. Outside, the windshield revealed an ordinary world of asphalt. A few patients huddled under the bus shelter, and some headlights moved down the access road. I spoke out loud to myself about being tired and on edge. It's the kind of thing you tell yourself when you want to believe everything is normal. Typically, the drive home is just static and nothing, radio low, coffee cooling in the cup holder. But that night was different. The radio cut out completely around the county line, going silent for 10 miles before returning like a train pulling into a station. Street signs looked strange, seeming to shift with each blink, words slightly off, fonts appearing thicker. My phone's calendar notification showed 3:17 a.m., which was different from the 3:08 a.m. time I'd noted at the hospital. I thought about the security feed timestamp and the guard's static report, telling myself I was just creating patterns from noise. Pulling into my driveway brought a small comfort of familiar house lights. Miso, my cat, greeted me with cold paws and a tail curve like a question mark. I dropped my wet coat on the foyer chair and made coffee, following my usual routine, using the familiar motions of measuring grounds and listening to the kettle's metallic sounds as a way of reassembling my sense of normalcy. Sleep never came. I sat on the couch with my mug, window cracked open, watching the sky. I considered calling my sister but knew the story would sound thin if spoken aloud. People would offer a half-sympathetic laugh, suggest I need rest, a polite dismissal of something strange. Between news reports and refilling the kettle, I noticed my watch was 3 minutes ahead of my phone. I set them both down, unsure which to trust. Something felt off, like the world had a seam, a pattern knitted twice over, creating a ridge you could feel beneath your fingers. The coffee grew cold. Miso slept curled in my palm. Dawn arrived oddly, soft and pink through the clouded eastern sky. By 7 a.m., I was driving back to work, following my usual routine, with the lot looking ordinary in daylight. The security guard rolled his wheelbarrow of cones back from a long break. The lot was quiet, cars parked in their usual spots. My mind runs through lists, reflections, and explanations like scattered billboard light. Some thoughts sit neatly, like receipts in shoeboxes, but other moments defy categorization. How every car in the lot seemed to shout together, how everything settled in an exact moment that doesn't quite fit into rational explanation. That morning, I went home and did laundry. Late out of habit, I checked the security footage at the nurse's station. The clip around 308 showed an empty rectangle of rain-slick asphalt. A white smear clipped the camera for a fraction of a second, then silence, no shape, no craft. The timestamps blurred for 9 minutes like ink left in the rain. The footage refused to be useful. I know certain things. I walked past the chapel. The shoes were dry in the morning sun. The alarms went off and the entire parking lot made a single metallic noise before stopping. I saw a silver reflection drifting above the roof, but when I turned, the sky was empty. I drove home, made coffee, and watched the sky until dawn. Now I write between shifts and look up when I pass the hospital at night. I don't expect it to return. I just look because sometimes the world offers something that won't fold back into normalcy, and watching is the only honest response. In my tent, the ground began to hum. The vibration was insistent enough to move my elbow. This wasn't the soft, regular weight of a distant forest road truck. It was thin and steady, like a bass note pressed into earth. I lay there, wondering if it was a rainstorm or my imagination, then unzipped the flap and looked out. If you asked what I think happened, I'd tell you I don't know. Treetops were rigid, leaning in unison. No breeze stirred the branches. Every crown on the ridge across the creek angled identically, as if someone had tilted the entire forest to one side. Leaves remained motionless, not even shimmering. My headlamp beam skimmed pine needles that reflected light without moving. Above the stillness, a long, pale glow slid across the sky. It wasn't a dot or a flash, but a soft, stretched light, perhaps like a canoe inflated and illuminated from within, moving in one smooth, silent glide, without defined edges. I'm Nate. I'd hiked into the Laurel Hollow area for 2 nights alone, seeking solitude away from any signal or human presence. My tent sat on a small, flat bench near a tributary, chosen for its peaceful water sounds. The creek, the switchback, the ridge. I knew the route well. I'd locked my car, walked in at dusk, seeing only a couple distant headlamps on another trail. Nothing seemed unusual at first, but then small details began to stack up. Earlier, crossing a meadow, I'd encountered 5 deer frozen in the brush. They stood like statues, heads turned in the same direction. For about 20 seconds, they remained perfectly still. Then one blinked, and they melted into the trees. On the trail, I passed a headlamp that suddenly died, its beams swinging once before darkness. I called out. Silence answered. When I returned later, the lamp had vanished without a trace. At my campsite, I discovered my compass in the tent vestibule, its needle spinning wildly. Full 10-degree rotations, then a sudden snap. This was a compass I'd carried since college, not a delicate instrument. The creek's reflection looked like it was breathing white beneath the darkness. The ground beneath my pad vibrated, in rhythm with a faint, distant pulse that sounded like far-off rain if you listened closely. A pale, suggestion-like light continued its silent journey across the sky, defying explanation. My watch, the trees, the stream, everything felt off. The owls were quiet, and the frogs had stopped completely. Thick clouds had earlier broken into a dark river of sky, hanging low as if someone had folded the heavens. My phone's weather app wouldn't load, but the barometer read steady. This made the sudden silence even more unsettling. I moved just outside the tree line, following the ridge, my breath catching. The landscape had become a frozen theater. Leaves, insects, and the creek all suspended in an eerie stillness. When I first noticed the glow, it defied explanation. Close up, it had no clear structure. I couldn't tell if it was something massive in the distance, or something thin and near. Its edges were soft, moving with an almost deliberate patience, like being pulled on a gardener's string. I unzipped the tent and crawled out in my socks. The ground beneath me was cool, and when I crouched down, I could feel a steady double-tap pulse running along the root lines, making the grass vibrate. My phone screen remained black. No camera, no map, no signal. Being so cut off felt wrong. I grabbed the binoculars from my pack. When I held them steady, my breath fogged the glass. For a moment, my own breath smeared half the view. Then, suddenly, the glow vanished. The treetops dropped back, and the undergrowth cautiously returned to its normal sounds. What stayed with me most was the loss, the abrupt disappearance, and the way my watch seemed to read a time that didn't match my memory. First it read 12:46, then 10:41, then calmly settled on 10:05. As if nothing unusual had occurred, time felt elastic. In that moment, stretching and contracting beyond normal perception. Not wanting to start hiking too early. Partly it was about having daylight to boost my courage, and partly because I wasn't entirely sure what I'd experienced wasn't just a dream. The initial descent felt routine. The creek meandered its usual path, the switchbacks were familiar, and oak trees bore their standard trail markers. But something felt off. Small signs kept suggesting something had been present. My bright orange trail marker had vanished from a spot I'd carefully marked earlier, replaced by a narrow scratch across the bark like a fingernail drawn across a ledger. A quarter-mile further, I found another marker wedged into a sapling's fork, folded oddly as if someone had deliberately repositioned it. No footprints or debris, just these precise, unsettling rearrangements. On my way out, I encountered an older woman with a daypack and dog. We exchanged the casual morning greetings typical of people who recognize each other's faces. "You camping?" she asked. I gave a non-committal shrug. "Just a quick overnight." She didn't push further. Later, I heard she'd been telling people about strange lights she'd witnessed years ago and how animals had reacted. Part of me wanted to ask if she'd noticed anything unusual the night before, but something held me back. People have a way of sharing certain stories. They look at you expecting a knowing nod before moving on. She'd probably filed her experience under unexplained encounters. The return journey felt interminable. On the old logging bridge, I suddenly stopped. My knees felt cold, as if struck by an invisible force. The air seemed filtered, different. My chest fluttered uncomfortably, causing me to repeatedly check my pulse. In the parking lot, my friend's truck radio was nothing but static. I sat, watching, waiting. By the time I drove out and hit the county road, it was nearly noon. Sunlight had burned away the low clouds, and the sky looked disappointingly normal. From the car window, the trees seemed subtly changed. The pines looked smaller, as if the night had somehow inflated and then deflated them. When I reached a signal area, I texted my sister about coming home early. Her response was predictably pragmatic. "Good. Bring coffee." I almost called her with a warning, "Don't go into Laurel Hollow," but I didn't. How do you explain something you barely understand yourself? The night I drove home, something shifted. An alert curiosity kept me aware of every passing shadow and street light, watching for something undefined. At a gas station, I pulled up the dashcam footage. Nothing unusual stood out except a short, blank white frame, exactly matching the moment when that strange glow had passed. The clerk brushed it off casually, saying, "Cameras sometimes hiccup." He wasn't interested in investigating further, and I didn't press the issue. Back in my apartment that night, I lay awake until 2 a.m. lights off. I listened intently for the hum that once seemed to run underneath everything. Only the building's machinery broke the silence. The elevator, pipes clanging when someone above showered. Clear planets hung in my window. I considered returning the next weekend with a friend who knows how to handle darkness. But something felt wrong about repeating the trip, as if replaying it might break a delicate seal. In the weeks after, I told 2 friends, one I regularly hike with, and another obsessed with weather anomalies. They deflected softly, maybe lenticular clouds. Maybe I was just exhausted. The weather enthusiast suggested treetops could look strange with certain microbursts. The watch might be a glitch. I didn't mention the binoculars showed nothing when the glass fogged. I didn't describe the vibration that felt like a note humming under the ground. I left out how the river looked when that light's reflection passed, as if something had smoothed its skin and vanished. Weeks slipped by. You tuck experiences away, folding moments into your usual narrative like a stray receipt in a wallet. But this habit lingered. I look up at the sky more often now. Sometimes at night's edge, I stand on my balcony, watching cloud banks crawl, waiting stupidly as if trained to observe some invisible cue. Most times, there's nothing but light pollution and traffic's drone. Last month, I returned to Laurel Hollow during daylight. I walked the ridge, checked the trees. The orange marker tapes remained exactly where I'd left them. The old logging bridge had a new plank. Someone had been here. The thin, pale scratch on the bark remained like a faded scar. When I ran my thumb over it, it felt ordinary, just healed wood. No one I spoke with had seen anything unusual. They'd heard the usual stories about lights over the county, no specific recollections, just a vague sense that something unexplained existed. I was finishing up a brake job for a neighbor's truck in my small auto shop just off Main Street in Cedarville. Late February, the garage heater humming quietly, fluorescent lights buzzing in that way they do before flickering. My name's Leo, and nights like these are usually quiet. Most folks bring their cars in during the morning or weekend. Something odd crawled through the sky that night, and the world around me seemed to pause. I noticed a ripple across the truck's hood. Not a shadow, not a tool dropping, but a strange movement, like a finger across water's surface. When I reached out and touched the solid metal, the ripple vanished. The air felt different, wrong somehow, weighted. It reminded me of summer heat, bending horizons, except this was cold. The overhead light caught in the truck's reflection, and for a moment the vehicle's edges wavered like heat rising off asphalt in July, except it wasn't hot. I glanced at the fluorescent light and saw it shimmer slightly, its edges wavy even though the bulb itself looked normal. I was wiping down the fender of a 2001 F-150, the red paint almost too clean under the garage lights. My rag froze mid-swipe. I don't have a tidy explanation. No footage anyone reliable would accept. Just a memory of treetops leaning together, a pale long light sliding silently across clouds while the ground beneath my feet pulsed like a bass note. The kind of memory you try to shrug off but find yourself checking anyway. Something that shouldn't happen did. And then everything resumed as if some unspoken rule had been paused and then started again, leaving a space in your day where something inexplicable had been. Something about the way the shadows stretched and bent unnaturally around the car told me this wasn't normal. The street lights outside didn't match the shadows cast by the vehicles. A strange sensation crept up my spine, that uncomfortable feeling that makes you want to look away but also compels you to keep watching. I moved to the workbench and grabbed a flashlight, trying to make sense of what was happening. When I turned back, the entire ceiling seemed to ripple, not like a curtain moving in a breeze, but as if the air itself was bending in slow, deliberate waves. I leaned against the truck for support, my heart racing. The F-150's hood caught my attention again. This time, it wasn't just a subtle ripple. The surface looked like it was vibrating in slow motion, with light edges stretching into faint arcs. The air had that metallic tang you sometimes feel in a snowstorm, but stronger, like it was, thickening the very space around me. My background music started to stutter and warp, spinning unevenly, like a damaged record. The phone on the workbench glitched and went black before rebooting. I muttered something about garage wiring, checking the breaker box. Everything looked normal. The fuses were fine. The air grew heavier, pressing down like the atmosphere before a massive snowstorm. Then something truly bizarre happened. The ripples on the truck began moving independently, sliding across the metal like liquid mercury. When I swept my flashlight across the ceiling, the beam seemed to bend slightly. No matter how I tilted it, a shimmer followed just beyond direct sight. Unnerved, I grabbed my car keys and stepped outside. The night was cold and calm. The street was empty. The garage door's shadow stretched normally across the asphalt, but the sky above the building was anything but normal. It hung like a trembling heat haze, wavering with faint silver distortions. Squinting, I saw slender pale lines moving across the sky in impossible directions, straight up and down, as if the air itself was rolling over something invisible. A passing car's headlights cut cleanly through the distortion, leaving the shimmer suspended above the garage. Not I pulled off the county road and killed the engine because the sky was doing that slow wrong thing where everything feels like it's holding its breath. My name's Mason and I chase storms on the weekends for whatever money freelance clips bring in because I can't stand sitting on the couch while a wall cloud does something interesting an hour away. As I entered the warped patch, the beams stretched in weird lines, then snapped normal once it was past. A pull tugged at my watch like my brain couldn't let the anomaly go. Deep unease crept over me, a warning I couldn't name. I called Tom, my friend who's been an amateur astronomer forever, and told him to look at the sky over Cedarville if he was up. At first, he said nothing. Then, Leo, I don't know, man. Maybe just Aurora solar storm. I laughed, nervously. Aurora in February in Illinois? He didn't answer. By the time I decided to go back inside and lock the shop up, the shimmer had faded slowly, like steam rising off a cold street after a brief sun. The F-150's hood looked normal again. Fluorescent lights buzzed in their usual way. Everything seemed normal, except for the heavy feeling in my chest, the faint metallic tang in the air, and the vague memory that the air above the garage hadn't obeyed gravity for a little while. I drove home slowly, doors locked, windows up. In my driveway, I stepped out, and the sky overhead looked perfectly normal. Stars faint through high clouds, nothing to see, nothing to explain. But I knew what I'd seen, felt, and I kept catching myself glancing at the garage from the end of the street. That day in late May, the air south of town was thick and hot and smelled like iron, the kind of heat that makes the whole horizon sag. The next morning, everything seemed as it should. No traces, no physical evidence. The truck's metal was cool and solid. The heater was just humming. But I remembered the ripple, the shimmer, the air bending like liquid above the ceiling, and how my skin felt like it was vibrating in time with something I couldn't see. I've gone back to that garage plenty of nights since. Nothing ever happened again. The tools are still lined up the same. The trucks sit where I left them. The fluorescent lights buzz normally. The air feels cold, empty, normal. But every once in a while, late at night, I swear I see the metal surfaces flicker with a thin of motion. Just a hint, like a memory of what was up here, hovering and bending the night sky itself. The cell all afternoon, rolling past pickup trucks and farmers who greeted me like we shared a secret understanding. At the roadside, I parked where the field stretched flat and the cornrows gleamed. The wall clouds were sagging lower, and something felt different. My dashcam mounted on the hood, I watched the base carefully. Strange things began subtly. The swallows hunting insects over the drainage ditch suddenly vanished, as if someone had drawn a curtain closed. My county radio hissed, then squealed like a tape rewinding before going quiet, long enough to make me check the connection. My phone flickered momentarily without service, then returned to 3 bars as if nothing happened. These were the small glitches that defy easy explanation. The kind that make your skin prickle even when you try to rationalize them with weather terminology. The wind carried a tight metallic smell, and the corn bent in ocean-like waves. I cleaned the camera lens meticulously, preparing to record whatever might unfold. A farmer in an old pickup joined me at the shoulder, tipping his cap in silent understanding, the country way of acknowledging tension without speaking. The funnel descended thin and quick, stretching toward the ground like taffy. It wasn't dramatic like television portrayals, but a patient machine of condensation. My dashcam captured columns of dust punching upward, trucks dimmed their headlights, and a distant dog fell silent. That pregnant pause before atmospheric transformation. Then I saw them. 3 lights inside the column, positioned in a rough triangle, 1 near the bottom, 2 above. They remained unnaturally steady despite the funnel's violent rotation, sharp and white, like handheld LEDs. They looked precisely wrong, as unexpected as a bookmark tumbling in a washing machine. I stepped out of the car, needing a better angle and hoping to capture the sound. Sitting inside felt like watching through glass, disconnected from the unfolding moment, and I felt the sting of grit in my face like a wall. My breath stayed normal, hoping to steady my hands. The dashcam's audio caught the storm's gusts and a farmer's radio 2 fields over talking about something moving quickly. No extra sounds emerged, no mechanical whine, no rotor noise. Just regular storm sounds layered with an impossible calm inside the funnel. A bolt slashed from the cloud to the field on my left, the kind of lightning that makes your teeth feel like they want to rearrange themselves. The 3 lights vanished the instant the flash hit. No dimming, no staggered fade, just gone. The camera frames showed a white flash, and then empty space where the bright points had been. The funnel kept spinning, dust still rising. Those lights had been inside it like beads on a wire, and then nothing. I blinked reflexively, my eyes feeling like they'd been filled with sand. Calls came in quickly after the strike. Other chasers texted short clips with exclamation marks and coordinates. Someone else's dashcam had captured a tandem view, showing the same pattern of instant disappearance during the flash. We traded shaky footage and timestamps like excited kids swapping baseball cards. The dispatcher connected us with weather service numbers, asking about debris or damage. Ground reports were predictably mundane. Flattened corn, a broken fence post, a leaning silo in the next township. Nothing substantial to explain the lights. I kept watching, hoping they might return. Maybe the strike had just shocked whatever was holding them. The funnel moved off the field, its rotation wobbling as the gust front passed. The previously quiet radio now buzzed with chatter. Another crew calling coordinates, the county asking about power lines. My camera files held a few frames where you could glimpse the triangle if you froze the image. The farmer who'd been parked leaned out of his truck, quietly swearing that he'd seen a weird light his kid had filmed on a phone. He didn't seem afraid, just unsettled in the way people get when the world does something unexpected. After the chase, I drove home slowly, thinking about how precisely those lights had held steady inside something designed to destroy. At home, I uploaded the raw footage to my laptop, pausing and re-watching, trying to make sense of what I'd witnessed. Note Ray spent months working the night shift at a desolate lot, a small trailer his base of operations. A space heater, 3 dead houseplants, and a coffee maker that was more decoration than utility filled the space. The lot belonged to an abandoned strip mall, its coming soon sign flaking and faded, chain-link fences standing sentinel around CCTV monitors that let him feel like he was watching something significant. His job was a blend of monotony and routine. Every 20 minutes, he'd check the cameras. Midnight brought a sweep of the lot. He'd log anything unusual and call dispatch if someone trespassed. Ray knew the raccoons' routes, the spots where stray cats liked to sunbathe at dawn. He recognized the bus's final loop and the occasional skateboarding kid trying to cut through. Then something happened that didn't fit the usual pattern. 3 distinct lights held steady against spinning wind, vanishing the moment lightning struck. He kept the files, not as proof, but as a record of an event that defied explanation. Experts sent cautious emails, reflections, lens flare, sensor errors were suggested. A meteorologist friend found it intriguing, requesting timestamps. No one laughed at the frames. No one had a definitive answer. The morning after, the field looked typical of one hit by a funnel, flattened rows, broken posts. The farmer, drinking coffee from a paper cup, explained he'd slept in the cellar, as one does when the sky looks like it might rearrange itself. His kid's video had captured the lights too. Town explanations circulated, mirrors, drones, optical trickery, but none matched the precision of what Ray had witnessed. 3 lights, frozen like beads, then erased by a white flash. No tidy explanation existed. What remained was a camera's evidence, a farmer's testimony, other chasers' shaky recordings, and a persistent memory of those 3 lights holding ground inside a moving column, vanishing instantly when the sky unleashed its bolt. A section of corner cameras had been acting strange for 2 nights. Static would briefly stretch across the screen and settle. The backgate's motion sensor pinged twice in the morning with no recorded activity. Parking lot lights randomly dimmed and brightened, which the maintenance crew attributed to city grid issues and noted on a sticky note. My radio caught a fleeting 3-second voice fragment that sounded like underwater mumbling before dissolving into static. These were the kind of small, forgettable incidents you log and then ignore. Tuesday, around 3 a.m., I was scrolling through surveillance feeds because the trailer's heater had died and my hands needed something to occupy them. The main monitor was split into 4 sections. In the lower right tile focused on empty parking stalls, something caught my eye. Initially, I thought it was just my imagination. A shadow or light trick, but the movement was deliberate and slow, taking 3 camera frames to traverse a parking space width. It looked more like a shape than a person, with soft edges like a sheet dragging across a frame. Hovering about a foot off the ground, it drifted across asphalt without disturbing car reflections or casting any shadows. No soundbar registered on the CCTV, but I could hear my own heartbeat pounding. Rewinding and playing the footage slower revealed a consistent pace, slow enough to read parking spot lines as it passed. It wasn't a color, but more like an absence within the grainy night feed. The timestamp showed 18 seconds of continuous movement. I used pan-tilt controls to check other camera angles, but nothing was captured. The shape simply glided off the right edge of the tile, as if passing through a seam in reality. Standing up too quickly, I knocked over my coffee cup. My hands instinctively reached for the radio. "Dispatch, this is Lot 29er. I'm advised of movement on camera 3, I reported, my voice small and tight. Static crackled briefly before the dispatcher responded in a tired, clipped tone. "Copy Lot 29er. Do you have visual?" I described what I'd seen and requested backup. He assured me a unit would circle the lot and instructed me to step outside. Standard, bland procedure. And I stepped out, my badge in hand. The night hit like a door closing colder, clearer. The parking lot carried hints of oil and pine sap. White lights glared down on the rows ordinary and stark. I swept my flashlight across the asphalt, checking every camera pole, concrete wheel stop, and empty car corral. Nothing. No tarp, no blanket, no hidden figure. My breath worked like a small motor in my chest while the radio chattered about a cruiser 10 minutes away. The dispatcher wanted me to watch from a safe distance. Walking the central aisle where the shape had been, headlight halos cut bright bands through the darkness. I shone my light under cars, feeling ridiculous checking a late model sedan for something I couldn't describe. But that's the job, covering bases so someone else doesn't have to. Near stall 7, a small circle caught my eye in the dust. Darker where it had been rubbed or compressed. It formed a perfect circumference, maybe hubcap-sized. Not a footprint, no smear or shoe tread. It looked like a tidy thumbprint on a dusty table. I crouched and ran a gloved finger around its edge, but the dust clung. Nothing came away, no tracks leading to it. The shape could have been made by a can or cover, except nothing fit. I checked the camera monitor again. The feed showed the stall empty, timestamp moving. Rewinding frame by frame, the scene matched reality except for the phantom shape drifting out of view. On the asphalt, only that neat dust circle remained. The cruiser rolled in slowly. The officer clicked his flashlight around, took my report, and asked about hidden individuals. I described the footage and dust circle. He inquired about the fences. I'd walked the perimeter twice that night. He radioed the shift and left a patrol to circle the area. He didn't laugh. No surprise beyond professional curiosity. We all had a job to do, an evening to get through. I slept in the trailer, its heater refusing to kick in. The thin blanket on the pull-out couch did more to warm my shoulders than any real heat. Then 8 o'clock, Luis the janitor arrived to sweep the lot. His was a face that didn't easily flinch, a result of 10 years on this shift and a gentle reserve that refused drama. I told him about the shape in the circle, and he nodded slowly, squinting at the morning sun as if light might reveal what the CCTV couldn't. He walked the asphalt and picked at the circle with his broom, then stopped and shook his head. I was washed clean by the morning dew, he said. He swept the dust away like it was a stain. We both watched the sweep and the brush kick up little puffs of dust that relieved whatever skin of oddness covered the place. The janitor's broom made the asphalt look normal again, the way a broom makes a floor seem ordinary. I took the footage to dispatch, and they archived it with a unidentified object label. They suggested cameras sometimes caught insects close to the lens, or experienced lens flare, and pixels could misbehave. They asked if I checked the hardware. I did. The camera was fine, its lens had no insects, and the casing was sealed tight. That week, people called the lot weird in little ways. Kids dared each other to set their skateboards on the cracked pavement. A night driver posted a shaky clip online of something blurry over a parking space, and the comments tried to make sense of it with jokes and explanations. The management company sent a tech out, replaced the camera, retimed a few lenses. They wrote maintenance in the log, and closed the incident as resolved. I went home in daylight thinking about the clean circle that had resisted both broom and explanation, about the way the shape moved without sound and without touching. My wife Kara worked afternoons at the bookstore and was asleep on the couch when I walked in, a half-finished paperback on her chest. I made coffee and set the kettle to go because routine helps stitch weird nights back into ordinary lives. She asked me how the graveyard shift went, and I said, slow until early morning, and left it at that. There are things you tell and things you keep. She didn't ask the details, and I didn't press them on her. Sometimes late at night now, when I sit in the trailer and the heater hums and everything is routine, I pull the footage back up on the screen. My dreams were empty boxes and the sound of a projector clicking film. By dawn, I had coffee in hand and my bones in motion. The patrol gave me their file number and the sergeant's card, and then they were gone. The cruiser slipping down the access road like any other night. The night shift at the desert base was like most others. Quiet, sometimes too quiet. It was mid-March 2018, and while days were warming up, nights still held a sharp, dry chill that crept under your jacket. I'd been working these shifts for almost a year, doing maintenance and monitoring equipment near the perimeter fences. Louise and I were sitting in the small portable shack, logging sensor readings when something unusual began. At first, it was faint, like a distant call barely audible over the wind. I tilted my head. "Did you hear that?" Louise paused, her pencil suspended over the log sheet. "Hear what?" I pointed toward the flat desert beyond the chain-link fence. "That screaming or something like it out there." She frowned, squinting into the darkness. "Could be coyotes," she suggested. But I shook my head. "No, coyotes don't sound like that. It's human." We sat quietly, straining to listen. The wind shifted, and the sound came again, higher pitched, wavering, fading in and out, carried on desert gusts. It wasn't constant, more like bursts, sometimes overlapping, almost echoing across the empty terrain. Louise grabbed the radio. "Dispatch, this is Patrol Unit. We think we're hearing something outside the perimeter, possibly on the east side. Can we get a sweep?" The calm reply came back, "Unit 3, proceed with caution." Copy. ETA for reinforcements, 5 minutes. By the time other patrols arrived, the sound had stopped. We spread out along the fence line, flashlights cutting across dark brush and uneven washes. Nothing. No tracks, no footprints, no evidence of anyone being out there. The desert remained untouched except for our own footprints in the sand. I checked the motion sensors along the fence. All clear. Thermal cameras showed nothing, not a single warm body. And yet that screaming, that sound of someone calling, had been real. I hadn't imagined it. Later, reviewing the monitor and watch footage, I noticed a soft, impossible shape gliding across the parking lines. I paused where the object sits above stall 7, comparing the paused frame to the actual asphalt outside the window. The images matched except for something in the frame, and a circle in the dust that no broom could entirely erase from my mind. My feet found a circle on the pavement, and the world went on like nothing odd had happened. My wife was calling me to supper, and the lot was empty more often than not. I can't say what I saw. I can only tell you that the cameras recorded it. We stayed out here for another hour, walking slow, circling, trying to find the source. Louise agreed. The wind carried faint echoes, soft enough that you almost convinced yourself it was nothing. But then it would rise again like someone right on the edge of hearing, just beyond the fence. By the time we returned to the shack, the air had cooled sharply. I leaned against the wall, trying to shake the unease that had settled over me. Louise just lit a cigarette, puffing quietly. Neither of us spoke for a while. Over the next few nights, the same thing happened. Around 1 a.m., sometimes 2, faint screams riding the desert wind, always coming from outside the perimeter, always impossible to locate. Patrols would search, sweep, run thermal cams, check motion sensors. Nothing. The recordings we kept on the comms channels never picked it up, at least not clearly, just static with occasional brief peaks that sounded like voices distorted and fleeting. One night, I stayed longer, sitting outside the shack with my back to the wind, watching the ridges in the distance. I started noticing movement, or what I thought was movement, at the edge of my peripheral vision, shadows shifting across the desert floor, but when I turned, nothing. Just sand, rocks, and low scrub. I began keeping a personal log, noting wind direction, temperature, approximate time, anything I thought might correlate with the sound. No pattern emerged. Sometimes it was calm other nights, gusting hard, sometimes coming from the north, sometimes from the south, always fleeting, always gone before you could pin it down. Luis quit a few months after that. He said he couldn't handle the tension, the constant sense of being watched, the way the sound would seem to follow him. I didn't blame him. Even now, when I think about it, I get that same uneasy pull in my chest, remembering how impossible it was to feel safe when the screams came. Even inside the shack, the base higher-ups never mentioned it officially. There were whispers, brief conversations, and hushed tones, but nothing concrete. Some of the newer patrols joked about hearing the ghost screams, but we all knew better. It wasn't a joke. I left that post eventually, moved back closer to Vegas. I still hear it sometimes in my dreams, the thin, wavering sound of someone calling, lost in the wind. And even now, years later, when I drive out on a deserted desert highway at night and the wind picks up, I glance toward the empty landscape. Here's the rewritten version. Something haunts me from that night, a memory so strange that it defies explanation. Official records show nothing, no sensors, no cameras ever captured what I experienced. But I know it happened repeatedly, vanishing completely without a trace. Back in 2011, I was an electrical contractor working at Area 51. My assignment that night was routine maintenance in the northern hangars, specifically Hangar 7. Late summer had brought a welcome drop in desert temperatures, making the work bearable. I had my tools, a small flashlight, and my truck parked just outside the main door. Around 11:30 p.m., Carson, my civilian engineer contact, called with an unusual request. He wanted me to check some wiring in a long decommissioned section of the hangar I didn't think much of. Old spaces get repurposed all the time. The hangar felt familiar yet alien. Metal and concrete dust hung in the air, mixed with a faint trace of ozone from emergency generators. My flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing unfamiliar machinery and crates with cryptic codes. My boots echoed against the concrete floor. Then I saw it. A figure at the hangar's far end, moving between crates, tall and thin. It shimmered like heat on asphalt, almost translucent. Initially, I assumed it was another worker or security officer on patrol. Nothing responded. The shape moved smoothly, almost gliding. As I moved closer, something felt wrong. My flashlight swept the floor between us. No footprints, no disturbed dust. This didn't make sense. I stopped, shining my light directly at the shape. For a moment, it seemed to pause, as if it noticed me. Then it moved again, disappearing behind some machinery. I tried my radio. "Carson, did anyone just walk through the north?" I tried again, louder. "Hello?" Nothing followed me, nothing chased me. But the memory remained, a bizarre encounter that defied all logical explanation. No response came from the control center, despite the radio crackling normally. My stomach tightened as I walked slowly toward the end of the hangar, careful not to make any sudden movements. The shape hadn't reappeared, and no trace remained on the floor. Initially, I thought it might have been a shadow or a trick of light, but my flashlight cut through the darkness clearly, revealing nothing that could cast such a shadow. My nerves were on edge as I moved through the hangar, checking behind machinery and crates. Every step echoed, and my own shadow danced across the walls. I reached the area where I was supposed to do the wiring, and everything seemed normal, though the air felt strangely heavy, almost pressing against me. As I knelt to check the connections, trying to calm myself, a faint scraping sound caught my attention. It came from the far side of the hangar, soft like metal sliding slowly across concrete. I froze, swinging my flashlight beam toward the sound. Nothing was there. I tried to rationalize it as a settling crate or an old door and continued working, occasionally glancing up. Minutes later, I saw it again, at the far end, standing between two pieces of machinery. The same tall, thin humanoid form appeared. I called out. No response. I waved my flashlight. The shape didn't react. Then, as I watched, it moved slightly and vanished, leaving the concrete floor completely bare. No footprints, no disturbed dust. Deciding to finish quickly, I found the wiring simple but couldn't focus. Every sound seemed too sharp, every shadow alive. As I packed my tools and headed toward the exit, I noticed the temperature dropping, despite the summer heat outside. My breath fogged in the flashlight beam. Impossible given the open doors and dry, warm desert night air. Stepping outside, I saw the dark desert sky scattered with stars. My truck waited where I'd left it. Glancing back, the hangar doorway stood empty, nothing moving inside. I drove toward the main base complex, lights dimmed to avoid security camera detection. The next day, I asked Carson about what I'd experienced. At first, it was small stuffed shadows that didn't quite match the objects around them. Faint machinery hums in decommissioned areas, occasional light flickers where no light should exist. I tried convincing myself it was just fatigue, stress, or the desert playing tricks on my mind. Then I saw it again. Late one night, while checking the HVAC system in a different hangar, I caught movement from the far corner of my eye. A tall, thin figure moving smoothly across the floor. When I swept my flashlight over the spot, nothing was there. The floor remained clean, no footprints, no disturbed dust. I called out, but there was nothing. After that, I started avoiding those sections of the hangars. I worked quickly, never lingering, and never mentioned the shape to anyone else. I wasn't ready to be laughed at or reassigned to some evaluation program. Years later, I still think about that hangar. I don't know what I saw, and I never got a straight answer. The concrete was untouched, cameras recorded nothing, and the shape left no trace. But I know what I saw with my own eyes. I can still picture the form gliding silently between machinery, disappearing without a sound or mark. Sometimes I drive out near the desert, away from towns and lights, and I swear I catch glimpses of it again. Tall, thin, moving just at the edge of my vision. And just like before, when I blink, it's gone. No footprints, no evidence, nothing to prove it was ever here. The night my colleague asked if anyone else had been in Hangar 7 the night before, I hesitated. "Nope," he said. "You were the only one. I didn't mention the shape, He'd probably think I was joking, or worse, that I'd lost it. I came home that night alive and unharmed, but I've never been able to shake the feeling that I wasn't alone in that hangar, and whatever it wasn't human. It was late May, and I was on the porch because the house felt too still inside. I'd just finished one of those long days at the clinic, back-to-back appointments, charts to fill out, those small nagging errors that make you check a patient's name twice. I left my bag by the door, poured a glass of something iced and weak, and settled into the swing with a blanket over my knees. The night was warm enough that it hung soft, but cool enough that you wanted a little something over your legs. The porch light cast its familiar yellow pool over the steps. The rest of the yard dissolved into hedges and the big maple that leans toward the fence. At first, nothing was odd. The neighborhood was quiet. Not somewhere, a TV murmured through an open window. A distant car passed, and a dog barked twice before returning to its nighttime routine. The little radio on the kitchen counter, set to low earlier, drifted out the back window before fading as people switched off their screens. I watched the sky, as I always do. It's a small ritual that marks the end of the day. A sliver of moon hung above, and the first stars emerged like pinpricks on black velvet. Rosie, our old beagle, was curled at my feet. Her nose tucked in, she stirred occasionally, then settled back down. That's when the first strange thing happened. The cricket's steady background noise suddenly cut off. Not a gradual fade, but an abrupt silence, as if someone had clamped a hand over their collective mouth. One moment they were chirping, the next the yard felt like a paused television scene. It was the kind of absence you notice like when the refrigerator stops humming. Subtle, yet making the whole house feel slightly uncertain. Rosie lifted her head, ears perked in that anxious listening posture dogs have when something feels off. She never does this without reason. I set down my glass and listened. For a while, there was only the distant highway, and a faint screen door thunked from down the block. I thought maybe the wind had died, which sometimes happens in valleys, those little pockets of perfect stillness where the air just hangs. Then the porch bulb dimmed. Not a flicker or a pop, but a softening, as if someone had gently turned down a dimmer switch. The light pool across the steps thinned, and the swing chair cast a longer shadow. I told myself that now was, the bulb was old and I'd replace it in the morning, sensible thoughts to calm my growing unease. The light brightened again after a moment, steady and normal. Later, the kitchen clock with its green LED numbers blipped, jumping forward 2 minutes, then back. The soundless tick felt oddly loud in a night now stripped of cricket song. I picked up my phone to check the time. A single network bar in that tiny searching circle indicated the network was essentially on vacation. My thumb hovered over the screen, almost willing it back to life. Rosie barked softly at the maple and stood up. Tail rigid, not wagging, she padded to the porch's edge and peered into the yard. I joined her, leaning on the railing. The sky glittered. Maple leaves stood as black cutouts against its backdrop. Orion was visible, if you knew where to look. And I did. No, I used to take my kids to the park and identify shapes in the sky. That night, a single star on the left side caught my attention. At first, it seemed like a distant pinprick, maybe even a plane. It hung steady and white. I watched it out of habit, not expecting anything unusual. Then something extraordinary happened. The star brightened suddenly, not gradually like light slowly emerging through thinning clouds, but instantaneously. In the space of a breath, it transformed from a distant point to a small, intensely bright bulb. The change was so abrupt, it felt like a sudden cut. My entire yard filled with a soft, cool, almost silver light that wasn't warm like a typical porch lamp. It flattened colors into a high-contrast sketch. Roses that had been coral now had hard white edges. Each blade of grass stood out distinctly, like paintbrush slats. When the light hit, the hairs on my forearm stood up. The air didn't change temperature. If anything, it felt thinner, as if the night had been stripped bare. This wasn't a focused beam or a traditional light source. It was as if the sky had decided to become a lamp, illuminating the map of my yard. Shadows sharpened immediately. The house across the street looked like an overexposed photograph. Even my dog Rosie's eyes reflected the silver light in a way I'd never seen before. My first thought was practical. Perhaps someone with a flashlight, a sports camera, or a truck spotlight, but the glow didn't behave like any of those things. It wasn't coming from the road, but from the sky where stars reside. This wasn't a plane. I would have heard an engine or seen strobe lights. The only sounds were the distant highway and my own subtle breathing. I called out my own name, a strange impulse born from wanting someone else to witness this extraordinary moment. Evan, I called, come here. My husband's voice drifted from the kitchen window where he'd been fixing something, as he always does, tools neatly tucked away by the sink. When he finally came to the door, the light had already faded. The star had returned to its ordinary pinpoint, and the yard was back to its normal state with a gold puddle of light from the porch bulb. Evan stepped out, rubbing his hands as if cold, though the temperature hadn't changed. What? He asked. The star, I said. It lit up the whole yard. Lobot, I wanted to turn something into a story, maybe an electrical glitch or neighborhood prank, but the tremor in my hands told me otherwise. I was looking at the sky, and he squinted where I pointed. The star's pinprick hung there, simultaneously innocent and wrong. I don't see anything, he said, as if he'd missed my entire point. He moved closer, draping an arm around my shoulders in that familiar way people do when someone seems rattled. You sure it wasn't just lightning or a plane? I was certain. Everything lit up like daylight. Described how shadows had become razor-sharp, how roses looked white-edged. I told him about Rosie's sky staring like she'd seen a person. He listened in his typical manner, slow, completely present. Then, without intending to sound dismissive, he suggested my eyes might be tired. We stood on the porch in its cooling golden light. I watched him mentally trying on explanations like someone testing coats, looking for a perfect fit. Part of me desperately wanted him to say, I saw it too, because shared witnesses make strange experiences feel more real. Instead, he simply asked, want me to check the street? He walked to the yard's edge, leaned over the low fence. Everything appeared normal. A parked car near the lamppost, a distant silhouette walking a dog, sodium lights casting their soft orange glow. He glanced back, returned without concern. Nothing odd, he reported. In the kitchen, he flipped through radio channels. The stove's tiny blue LED blinked 11:43 unchanged. The router's light continued its polite pattern. My phone, previously with one bar, now showed full signal, as if nothing had ever been disrupted. The porch bulb remained steady. The sky and everything else behaved like an old reliable friend. I kept thinking about that moment of extraordinary light, how the yard transformed, how roses looked like white sketches. I felt ridiculous for being unsettled by a momentary brightness. Yet something inside me remained fundamentally unnerved in a way I couldn't articulate. The house's ordinary objects, mug handle, Eastern, soft clock ticking, offered precise small proof that the world hadn't ended, not even a little. Who would believe us? Dao Mai. One evening I decided to escape from everything. My name's Laya, and I typically spend nights on the back porch with a glass of wine stargazing. Out in the hills near Ridgewood, far from city lights, the sky looks like glitter scattered across black velvet. This particular night was clear and unusually warm for late October, with not a single cloud visible. I was struck by an impulse to reach out to someone who might understand. Perhaps the neighbor who tracks weather, or maybe the city police, or an astronomer at the university. But then practicality took over. Mornings bring patience, bills, a child's rehearsal. The list of tasks shrinks the night down to normal proportions. I wrote a note in my phone, saw a bright skylight, 11:38 p.m., just a stubby piece of evidence. That night, I woke twice and went to the window. Habit is an odd form of superstitious logic. The sky remained unchanged. Stars, a sliver of moon. Rosie slept in her crate, her breathing slow and steady. The following evening, local news was filled with a council meeting about zoning. No mention of lights or sky phenomena. A week later, I walked the yard in daylight, searching for any scorched grass or melted leaf that might explain the intensity of the brightness. Nothing unusual, just sprinkler tracks and a faint ring where a bird had pecked. I'd catch myself staring upward, waiting for a star to flare like a switch being turned on. I kept expecting a repeat, a pattern, a reason. Life resumed its usual rhythm: work, dinner, routine. The phone note sat there like a small relic, an odd sentence about the world written by someone else. I don't have a tidy explanation. I only have the memory of that sudden high white light, how it sharpened shadows and flattened color. By the time Evan reached the porch, the sky had closed its mouth, and returned to being night. The garden looked the same, roses no paler, maple leaves just leaves against the sky. The event folded itself into the night with the quiet persistence of something that doesn't need telling. I was scanning the night sky, trying to memorize constellations when something caught my eye. A point of light didn't seem right. At first I thought it might be a satellite, but its movement was different. Abruptly stopping and darting like an invisible car slamming on its brakes, it zigzagged across the sky. My roommate Mara came out when I called her, bundled in her hoodie and yawning. I pointed to the strange light, and she squinted. Her skeptical expression changed as she watched it jerk unexpectedly. "Stars don't move like that," I whispered. We stood motionless, our breath visible in the cool night air. The light moved with an unnatural precision, sideways, pausing, hovering, then shifting again. Each movement felt deliberate, almost intelligent. I rubbed my eyes, wondering if I was imagining things. But Mara's silence was unusual. She typically dismisses my astronomical observations. Minutes passed. Suddenly, the light stopped completely, not just pausing, but becoming absolutely still, as if resting on an invisible surface. My stomach tightened. Through the binoculars, I saw no additional glow, no heat distortion, just a tiny pinprick of light. Then it darted across the horizon, nearly invisible except for a faint edge glow. "That's not normal," I muttered. Mara looked pale and said nothing. The most bizarre moment came when I glanced away and then looked back. The light was exactly where it had started, twinkling innocently like any other star. No motion, no blur, just instant relocation. My mind raced. Too fast for a plane, too precise to be random. "It's still here," Mara said softly. We spent another hour watching, hoping it would move again. It didn't. The other stars continued blinking quietly, unchanged by this strange encounter. The night seemed ordinary at first. A few distant planes crossing the sky, nothing out of the ordinary. My mind kept replaying the strange motion I'd witnessed, the jerky, intelligent path with sudden pauses and returns. I couldn't shake the feeling I'd missed something crucial. Inside the house, I checked my phone for explanations. Satellites, flights, drone sightings. Nothing matched the movement I'd seen. Inside matched the movement I'd seen. The next day I tried rationalizing it. Maybe my eyes were playing tricks, or perhaps a reflection from the porch light. But every time I considered these explanations, the memory returned. How fast it had moved, those sudden stops, returning precisely to its original position. No reflection behaves like that. Over the following nights, I went outside, hoping to catch sight of it again. The sky remained clear, stars steady, everything seemingly normal. Yet that single point of light haunted me. In quiet kitchen moments, I'd glance out the window and swear I saw it flicker, not moving, just a subtle pulse, as if acknowledging its presence. I haven't shared details with anyone. People would laugh or dismiss my experience. Even Mara, who saw it too, quickly changes the subject when it's mentioned. Sometimes I wonder if we were just tired seeing things, but I can't convince myself. Now I spend hours outside, tracking satellites and planes, searching for that erratic star. Occasionally, in the middle of a quiet night, I'll see it flash across the sky, impossible, precise, as if it never left that first location. Each time I blink, it's back in position. I don't know what it was. Not a plane, satellite, or meteor. Just one point of light moving in a way that shouldn't be possible, then returning like nothing happened. It leaves an unsettling feeling deep in my chest, quiet, persistent. I still watch the sky most nights, hoping to understand. Mostly it's just stars. And that one impossibly still point, waiting.